Good evening. Please be seated. Can I remind members to swipe the white card that has been provided this evening on the left-hand side of the microphone base to log in. Please remember to leave the white card when you leave the chamber. I would like to advise all present that in order to improve engagement in the democratic process, tonight's meeting will be recorded, with the audio recording being published on the Council's website. The meeting will also be filmed and live streamed. If any members of the public do not wish to be filmed, I would like to give you the opportunity to leave the chamber now, if they so wish. Members are also reminded to respect other members when they are talking and do not speak across the chamber when other members are speaking. All requests to speak must go through me. I would also like to remind members to please stand and use their microphone when speaking. Members are also reminded to turn mobile phones off and put onto silent. Before we begin the meeting this evening, I would like to invite the acting leader, Councillor Horden, to speak about today's incident.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, I had a very different speech prepared for this evening, but the terrible events of this morning have made me change. This morning, the police arrested an individual in West Thurrock, just outside of Lakeside, tragically discovering 39 bodies in the back of his lorry. My first statement is, of course, of tremendous remorse for the appalling loss of life of these 39 souls at the hands of a criminal. This is a terrible crime, and as a council, we will do everything possible and put in place everything possible to support enforcement agencies to help eradicate this evil. Let me reassure the community regarding actions council took this morning. Members can be assured that the business continuity plan worked as it was meant to. Our emergency command officers were notified at once by the police very early this morning, and I was informed by the Chief Executive just a little bit past 6. From here, myself, Roger Harris and relevant staff were all in place within the building to ensure that emergency plans were carried out as expected and support offered to the police. Group leaders and MPs were notified. From here, the council reached out and did the following. We ensured that despite some local traffic issues caused by both this situation and other situations in the borough, that our care providers were able to get to vulnerable residents. Schools were contacted to ensure that our psychiatry service and our mental health service is in place and on hand for the rest of the week for any children or young people who will be concerned or frightened by the events that they will see in the news this evening. We worked directly with the Red Cross and Lakeside businesses to make sure comfort, facilities and support was in place for emergency services on the scene. Our planning and highways team were working with emergency services to review how we could best return the area to a degree of normality, but we assured that the priority was supporting the police in their request for time and space to carry out their investigation. We have offered alternative accommodation wherever possible for locally affected businesses within the cordon, and we have worked with the police to ensure that media outlets, indeed from around the world, were given the clearest information from a direct source. And we guarantee that we worked hand in glove with the police to share information that the council holds regarding CCTV and other security information. I know everyone throughout the day was clamoring for additional information from the council, but the responsible thing for us to do in our judgment was to work diligently within our partnership and ensure that the only line of communication throughout the day was from Essex Police. Speculation, while exciting for some, gets in the way of people doing their jobs. Mr. Mayor, I would like to put on record my thanks to all of our partners, from health partners, such as the ambulance staff who were first on the scene, who saw things that were truly horrific, to the CCG and our local hospitals who stepped forward to provide the necessary arrangements for the deceased, to businesses and charities within the Lakeside area who supported the men and women in our emergency services, and to council staff who ensured that the organisation still functioned through such a terrible situation. To this end, Thurrock Council will be making a corporate donation to the Red Cross to thank them for their support, and myself and the Acting Chief Executive will visit the Red Cross and other businesses and charities who have been helping out tomorrow morning. Of course, my biggest thanks today goes to the police. We see the police each and every day, but it's only when you sit on the phone and hear them talk about some of the most gruesome events imaginable that you truly get a sense of the breadth and depth of the work they undertake for our communities every single day. You see the professionalism and the clarity they have today with the ambulance service dealt with things that we all have the good fortune of being kept away from, and we thank them for that. Mr. Mayor, events like this assault our understanding of humanity and test our faith. It's like our community has been violated, and it's because it has been. An area that we know as an area of leisure, surrounded by well-known businesses, schools and services, became a horrific scene as a result of this monster. However, when you see business leaders interrupt their day to come forward to see if they can support emergency services with hot drinks, when you see health leaders and school leaders approach the local authority to see if there's anything that they can personally do, and when you see many members of the local church community reaching out to us to offer us their prayers, we know that the Thurrock community is strong, resilient, generous and united. Mr. Mayor, clearly this situation has still some way to unfold. The council will remain in constant contact with the police to support their investigation and ensure that vital services in the area continue to function. This will be a lengthy investigation, and I can assure you that the council will work with all services to understand what else can be done in the future to better holistically work to prevent such awful circumstances from occurring. There will be further briefings from our emergency planning officers for group leaders after the investigation is concluded. The council has for some time been working with the Home Office via the Local Government Association in terms of support for the Refugee Resettlement Programme. In light of today, I've asked the Corporate Director to intensify this work. There has been a huge amount of commentary in the media today regarding the victims, and while we do not yet have a clear picture, what is clear that these people were indeed victims of an appalling crime. As such, a condolence book has been placed in the Civic Office reception for members of the public. The Thurrock community will now do what the Thurrock community does, which is offer heartfelt prayers to all those involved in this situation. From the Thames to the people of the world is the motto of this borough, and while this event has darkened this day, it will not undermine the ethos of this magnificent community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Horton. I now call on Reverend John Guest to lead us in prayer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillors and officers, ladies and gentlemen, if you are able, will you please stand? Tonight, the eyes of the nation, and indeed the world, are focused on Thurrock, but not for a good reason. Before I lead you in prayer, can we take a moment for silent reflection for 39 lives so uselessly lost, to remember those who loved them and those they loved. Sovereign and eternal God, maker of stars and loving Father to every human heart, tonight we cry out to you in anger and grief, for hopes and dreams lost, for families bereaved and abandoned, and for communities devastated by senseless and untimely death. We cry out to you, O God, for comfort and for justice, for an end to the vile exploitation of vulnerable people whose desperate needs have been objectified and overridden. Give wisdom, guidance and courage to our emergency services, to those who attended the scene, and to those dealing with the aftermath. May culprits be brought speedily to justice, and families and friends find proper support and compassion in their loss. Bring healing to our borough and to the communities whose sons and daughters have died in our land. God, we cry to you. Lord, have mercy on us all. We commit ourselves and our borough council to your boundless love. In Jesus' name, amen.
Reverend Guest, thank you for that, your thoughts. If you're quite welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, but if you need to leave any time, please do. We move on to item 1, which is apologies for absence. I've received apologies from councillors Byrne, Gledhill, Haig, Hebb, Johnson and Rice. Are there any further apologies? Thank you. Moving on to item 2, minutes. I move that the minutes of the meeting on council held on the 18th of September 2019 be approved as the correct record as shown on pages 7 to 32 of the agenda. Is that seconded?
Second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Holden. Are there any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? The minutes are approved. Item 3, items of urgent business. I have not agreed to the consideration of any items of urgent business. Moving on to item 4, declarations of interest. May I have any declarations of interest, please? Item 5, announcements on behalf of the Mayor. I have one brief announcement to make, and that on Sunday the 13th, I was very fortunate to ask to attend the Thurrock Nepalese Women's Association fundraiser. Now, the reason I mention it is that they were raising funds for my charity of the year given Thurrock, and they came to the chamber on yesterday, Tuesday, and presented me with a cheque for £600 towards the Mayor's charity. So I'd like to thank the Gurkhas Women's Association for the Nepalese Association for their support and helping me with my aim to raise money for Giving Thurrock. That's the end of my announcements. Moving on to item 6, questions from members of the public. I will now take questions from the public. 6 questions have been submitted and accepted by the monitoring officer. These are set out on of the agenda. For the benefit of the recording of this meeting, I would ask that the questioner read out their question when asked to do so. We have up to 30 minutes for this item, therefore can I please ask that the questioner and member be as brief as possible in their questions to ensure that we cover as many of them as submitted tonight. I would also inform the questioner that any supplementary question that they may ask should not take the form of a statement and must be related to the original question or the answer that is given. Can I ask that Democratic Services please guide the member of the public to the seating area? Mrs. Saunders, would you please read out your question to Councillor Watkins as set out on page 33 of the agenda?
would like to ask the council why so many trees are being removed in Thurrock. In particular, Dill Road, this is near where I live, I'm in Rectory Road. The Orsicock roundabout, Rectory Road, Chadwell Road, and we noticed some had been taken down at Carhouse Fort as well when we were out walking. So, thank you.
Councillor Watkins, please respond to the question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Welcome, good evening to yourself as well, Mrs. Saunders. Trees could be removed for a multitude of different reasons, such as development or issues specifically related to that tree, or for particular safety issues as well. But I would just like to point out, and I'm sure equally how you feel, but I don't like seeing trees being taken down. They would only ever get taken down if there was ever actual need to do so. But in case you were not aware, Cabinet in February, thanks to a motion which was passed actually through Council, approved of a tree planting strategy which would replace trees taken down on public land. Tree planting within that was also backdated as well. So there were 66 trees being replaced in total. There's also been additional ones since the storm, for example, we've had this year. There was trees which came down within that, and those ones will equally be replaced. Regarding specific sites which you've mentioned in here, the Orsicock has had trees taken down, which is part of the A13 road widening scheme. They will be replaced as part once that has been finished, and obviously that's a multi-million-pound project which is being done to improve congestion across the A13 up to Highways England section. Dill Road, which I know you've also mentioned as a particular area you've got an interest in, that's actually a private developer. So the council has no power over what the residents do with those particular trees unless a tree preservation order is in place at a particular time, which the landowner has. Any trees removed at Coalhouse Fort would be from recommendations made by Natural England. And at this point in time, we do believe that that would be from outside of the Coalhouse Fort boundaries, which would then be in private areas as well. But we are just looking into that just to be doubly checked. But as I say, any trees which would be taken down at Coalhouse Fort would be through recommendations made by Natural England. But hopefully I can feel with some confidence. But equally, as we say, we don't like trees being taken down. But any trees which were taken down by the council would be replaced.
Thank you, Councillor Watkins. Mrs. Saunders, do you wish to pose a supplementary question?
Yes, please. It's mainly now about replacement, and if you could explain what the ratio of replacement is, please, and bearing in mind that not all of them survive because they're not watered, apparently, the trees, and some are damaged as well. So you need to replace more than one for each tree because they don't all survive, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Councillor Watkins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and equally, I thank you very much for your supplementary. I can completely understand what you're saying regarding new trees which were planted and then the life expectancy of those trees. We don't actually plant the small, sampling ones. We actually try and plant grown trees as much as we can do to ensure that the survival rates have increased. We have an excellent tree specialist here at the council by the name of Liz Wood, who I'm sure members across the chamber this evening would know and have dealt with previously. She does take the job seriously, as we do. Every single tree which is currently in council land or which is planted by the council is monitored closely, and we do continue to, as I say, place like for like at this period in time. And we also announced as part of that cabinet paper as well, which, as I say, did come through from a motion from Councillor Redseal, but we would also be exploring what further opportunities are available through the local plan for mass tree planting expansion, and also, which is in my report as well, there is mention as well, but we are still exploring as part of the redevelopment of the air quality strategy about what further planting of trees we can be looking into as well for particular sites and areas. But equally, it's not just always down to the council. We do have some councillors as well who do their own tree planting in the particular wards. I'm not trying to make Mr. Joy and Ben Knight, but I know that them two have planted quite a lot of trees, probably Councillor Apothecary and also Councillor Kelly as well. So a lot of councillors themselves plant trees in their own wards, which they do on their own and with the community.
Thank you, Councillor Watkins. question 2 by Mr Jones has been withdrawn. So we now move on to question 3 from Mr Perrin. Mr Perrin, would you please read out your question to Councillor Manny as set out on page 33 of the agenda?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Maney, would the council consider outlawing the practice of parking motor vehicles on pavements?
Councillor Manny.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Good evening, Mr Perrin. Thank you very much for your question. The first thing I'd like to say is that I and the council fully recognise the inconvenience and the problems associated with pavement parking. Aside from the problems it causes for pedestrians and wheelchair users, it also leads to damage to our pavements, and that equals a cost to the council. So it is something we take seriously, and we know the concerns that local people have. Your question asks, would we consider outlawing pavement parking? I think it's fair to say that, per se, the council doesn't have recourse to the law to do that. There are no legal provisions which allow us to implement an outright ban, as much as we might like to. Enforcement of pavement parking rests primarily with the police. That's not to say there aren't things we can do. Obviously, if there is a road that has weighting restrictions in, if people park on the pavement, those weighting restrictions apply, and we will enforce them. There are things we can do in terms of physical measures. We can put in barriers. We've talked about tree planting. I found that planting trees on grass verges are a great way of stopping people park there. So as I say, we can put physical measures in place which prevent that. I want to talk about curb it. I'll talk about that more later. But I think where you live, the council has been actively installing extra parking provision on places like grass verges which have become worn and damaged because vehicles have been parking on them. That in turn provides extra parking provision and hopefully deters people from parking on the pavement. Lastly, I mean, there are things we can do from a community behaviour perspective under section 43 of the Anti-Social Behaviour, Crime and Policing Act. We can intervene, but that's very much in localised circumstances where there's evidence that is causing a nuisance to the wider community. So I hope I've given you a flavour of some of the things we can do, but in answer to your question, unfortunately there isn't any provision available to us which allows us to implement a ban per se or a Thurrock-wide ban. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Manny. Mr Perrin, do you have a supplementary question?
Please, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Maney, for your answer so far. I asked the question because some pavements in Thurrock have become obstacle courses and in some cases downright dangerous. Pavements are now used by some as parking areas for their cars, vans, etc. Others use the pavements as permanent parking for their waste bins, some of which are overfilled and the rubbish spills onto the pavement, and the dumping of large items such as fridges, washing machines and vacuum cleaners. Such conduct can be dangerous when vehicles are parked on bends, thereby obstructing pedestrians and other drivers' view of approaching traffic. So will the council ensure pavements are safe, free of obstacles and are for the exclusive use of pedestrians?
Councillor Manny.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Again, I would restate that everything you say I agree with. I think that, you know, in some parts of the borough there are acute parking pressures, and, you know, to be fair, it's hard to see where people would otherwise park if they don't have off-street parking of their own. But I regard it firmly as antisocial behaviour. I have a particular loathing for people who park on grass verges, and I agree with you, people who park on pavements and damage those pavements are causing antisocial behaviour, pure, plain and simple. I think I've already said where the council can act, we will act. Unfortunately, we don't have the powers that we would like to have. You mentioned obstacles that are fly-tipped or left on the pavement. I think, you know, where they're reported to us or we know about them, of course we'll remove them. We spend a lot of taxpayers' money, in my opinion, repairing pavements needlessly, and frankly, we're fighting a losing battle. That's money we could be spending on other services if we weren't repairing pavements needlessly. So I can only give you my personal assurance that I think we should take, as far as we can, account of a very dim view of people who park inconsiderably on our pavements. Pavements are for walking on, they're not for parking on or driving on. I do have to reiterate again, we are limited in what we can do, but where we can take action and that's feasible, I would always fully support that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Question 4 from Mr. Arnold has been withdrawn. So we move on to question 5. Mr. Rowalski, would you please read out your question to Councillor Watkins? Sorry, I should have waited for you to get to your seat. As set out on page 33 of the agenda.
What is Thurrock going to do to address the toxic levels of pollution in the air, which damages and negatively impacts people's health in the area?
Councillor Watkins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, again. Thank you, Mr. Wachowski, for your question this evening as well. Very important topic, which I know we'll be talking about later in the motion and no doubt in my annual report later as well. But as my report, hopefully, if you've had a chance to read it and will demonstrate this evening, is that we have laid out many ways in which the council has already previously and is currently tackling in order to try and improve the air quality across Thurrock. And we, as a council, especially myself as well, does take the tackling of air pollution and trying to improve it as much as we can do very seriously. Just to give you a bit of background information, we do actually have some monitoring air pollution stations in Thurrock. We do that in 2 different ways, with fixed sites, and we also have some mobile monitoring tubes as well, which we equally put up. The information we receive from the monitoring is imperative in us coming up with both strategies to tackle the air pollution, so that any strategy which we put in place actually has a starting base for us to compare against at the end of that test or within that test to see whether the improvement's being made. There was a strategy which was produced by this administration back in 2017, which, using the data collected from monitoring, has multiple strategies already in place. Some of the work which has been carried out from that strategy, just to give you some background, is we have introduced new weight restrictions and further HGV movement management across the borough. We know that they're quite high in producing toxic pollution, so those schemes are in place and are currently being used. I know Councillor Maney, in his annual report this evening, has got a reference within there around the school travel plans. So those are in use by a multitude of schools, but there are still some schools out there which would be very grateful in taking them up, which can also play a part in reducing air pollution. The new A13 east-facing slips, which will be installed, mentioned previously, and it's in my annual report, will be dealing with severe congestion that's built up within that particular area to help relieve that. The A13 widening project equally is to try and help traffic move freer, which with congestion. We are also introducing some further electric car charging points, which the leader is currently working with myself, to hopefully promote more of an electric vehicle take-up use. And also equally through the local plan, which will play a large role in both pushing, promoting and making sure there is a more holistic approach taken with climate change in mind. And also in the building we're currently sitting in as well, as part of the great regeneration and also leading from the front, we also will be improving the cleanliness, air quality which this council produces, which will be a BREEAM outstanding building as well. There is more which has gone on. I could go on for longer, but equally importantly, as I announced to Councillor Fisher's question a few months ago, we have reopened up the strategy. We are looking at ways in which we can improve that. We are having a cross-departmental look into this, taking into the data as well from public health to ensure that any of the strategies which we put in place also will have an impact on improving the environment, but equally have an impact on improving people's lives as well.
Yes, the UK Parliament and over half of the boroughs have declared a climate emergency as a response to escalating climate change and loss of biodiversity. Will Thurrock declare an emergency and act upon that declaration?
Councillor Watkins.
There we go. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Kowski, for your supplementary. As you may have seen from the amendments this evening, no, I will not be supporting a climate emergency. The reason being for that is because I think it's quite well clear that the UK government is the first, I believe, in the world, or at least in Europe, to actually enshrine in law a commitment to have net zero emissions by 2050. We're doing substantially more as a UK government, and as the UK as a whole, not just the government, but people themselves, than any of our neighbouring boroughs, neighbouring nations, shall I say, both here and across the world as well. So I personally believe that, from my point of view, resource could be spent in actually improving the air quality and doing something right here in Thurrock, which is exactly what we are doing, with the commitment that we'll become carbon free as soon as we physically can, as soon as technology both permits, and obviously as soon as policies, both from a UK government point of view and also what we're doing locally, come into play. But as I say, I do stress equally, although I won't admit and say that I will support the climate emergency terminology, we are as a borough taking improving the climate seriously.
Thank you, Councillor Watkins. We now move on to question 6. Ms Sisterson. Right. Would you please read out your question to Councillor Coxall, as set out on page 33 of the agenda?
Yes, related to the others really. Please can councillors tell residents how the damage caused with the widening of the A13 is to be compensated for in terms of the carbon capture lost with the destruction of the trees?
Councillor Coxall.
Thank you. The trees that you're talking about were removed to facilitate the road widening, the construction of new bridges, which obviously reduces massive congestion we've had to suffer for many years there. In fact, it was one of my first questions to Council, to Councillor Rice when he was Highways. When are we going to sort the J13 out to get rid of this congestion at Stamford? So I'm glad it's moving forward. But on completion of the trees, they'll be planted in suitable locations where the widening is done, where they were removed during the clearance. So we're actually going to get our trees back in the long term. Hopefully by the end of next year, the trees will be back again after the road widening. We take seriously the benefit of trees and on the environment. And like you've heard previously with Councillor Watkins in the previous question. So the Cabinet have approved the new tree strategy, as I repeat again, in February 2019 this year, that every tree removed from public land will be replaced, and we aim, well I would like to aim to actually increase that, and through the local plan process again, we need to think about how green spaces to increase the amount of trees here, protect our woods, especially around Bellis Woods and around the areas there are great woodlands which need to actually be protected more than where we are, and I hope tonight when you see the local plan coming through, that will be part of it. It's not just about the development which gets looked into, but we've got to think about the tree planting, the woodlands, the extra green spaces here, not just green, large open meadows. We need to think about how we develop these great woodlands. Bellis Woods, I mentioned before just now, is because it's a very old woodland, and these historic woodlands need protecting, need looking after, and that's part of the duty of this council.
Thank you, Councillor Coxall. Ms Sisterson, do you have a second question?
Well, just quickly, I'd like to take issue when you say the widening of the A13 will improve the through road traffic. Widening roads tends to increase traffic. If there's more roads, you get more traffic. So I'll just take issue with that. About the trees, I had an answer to a question about the number of trees felled and the number of trees planted since 2015. In those 4-year period, we've had 299 trees felled apparently. And including an extra year from 2014, we've only had 155 planted. So I'd like some assurances that that shortfall is going to be met in the future, so that those ones we've lost in the past will also be replaced. And also I'm concerned about the loss of the wildlife habitat. For example, in Aveley, where I live, we're having a big new distribution centre at the bottom of Purfleet Road, and at the moment that's shrubland, and it's going to be full of wildlife. There's going to be rabbits, foxes, all sorts of things living there. So my big concern is the loss of that habitat, because it's not just other countries in the world that are destroying their wild habitat, we're doing it here in Thurrock too. So that's my issue.
Councillor Coxon.
Yes, I agree with you, and that's why I mentioned Bellas Woods, because it's obviously close to Averley. It's really important. It's a great habitat that's undiscovered really, and what we need to do is improve that. I take issue about the road. When the Dartford crossing, I take issue about traffic, and when the Dartford crossing was congested, and the power station then had people coming down there like a ton of bricks saying they've now broke their emissions. They actually found out that it only happened when there was congestion of the Dartford crossing. So when cars are stopped, slowing traffic, that causes it. And that was what's happening around Stamford Junction. You couldn't go, it took you half hour to go through Stamford and through there. If we can get a free flow, cars will traffic, we reduce emissions. I take your point that the more you build it, more will come. I think we do need a holistic approach on that and how we deliver that, and I think we're fully aware of that. I think we're not, but we do need to deliver the congestion, and next year we will deliver a more congestion-free A13 as we go forward. The tree planting, I'm not the commitment for environment, but what I do like, I can point out that I think you've seen that Councillor Redsill, Councillor Maney, Councillor Apothecary, always plant trees, and we're trying to do that. One of my first things when I moved here many years ago, I walked down and I saw avenues without trees. Now, an avenue, as far as I can see, should have a tree. That's why it's called an avenue, not a road. We've got to put back them trees, and it's really important. I understand it demolishes car park, the pavements, but it is important to our communities, and it is nice to see the trees in avenues. It's nice to tree trees. We do need to do that, and during our building processes, if we move on to your last point about building and how we go through construction, construction companies have a duty to make sure that habitat, regardless if it was greenfield beforehand or brownfield, because habitat changes immediately on a brownfield, and we must continue to have a duty to protect the wildlife on them. And if you see over and over again, and I'm quite precious, you see over, they have to before they have to do agricultural surveys on every bit of land, and I'm sure Ponds Farm construction, and I will take it back and speak to the relevant people tomorrow morning to make sure that there is a thing on duty on that, on the Ponds Farm development, that they do look after habitat and have to transfer any animals or people if they are before they start construction, because that will, I'm sure, is already part of the provisions of the planning application. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Coxon. We now move on to item 7, petitions from members of the public. Please be advised that in accordance with the Council Petition Scheme, one notice of petition has been received this evening. I would ask that Democratic Services collect the petition after it has been presented. Councillor Redsill, would you please present your petition in regards to the residents of Woodside to note that the plans for the 300 pupil special needs school on the existing treetop site. You have 2 minutes to speak. Councillor Redsill.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a petition from nearly 200 residents from the Woodside estate who are seeking relief from the anticipated growth of traffic coming to the area. Mr. Mayor, as you already may know, there are 2 schools in Woodside, Treetops and Woodside Academy. Woodside Academy has expanded its intake. This led to an intake of more children, which has made an increase in traffic, all of which park on the adjacent roads. My constituents found driveways or footpaths blocked. When Woodside sought planning for 70 extra classrooms, part of the planning condition was to have parking in the rear of the school. That was reneged on, and this has not been enforced either. Now we are looking at a new school on the Treetop site. The only way for access is via Buxton Road. Only last week we had an altercation with 2 drivers which had a police intervention and presence. As councillors for Woodside, we do not object to the new school, but our residents expect us to make the impact bearable. We need a new access via Stamford Road. Then life may become tolerable for the residents of Woodside. If Alcett Academy becomes reality, the impact of all these schools will destroy a community. I employ members and council to pursue a plan for access to any new SEN school from the A1013. This is already a small road in place which construction traffic use. Also signs are in situ. I submit this petition. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Redser. We now move on to item 8, which is an update report in respect of those petitions presented at full council and council offices. This report can be found on page 35 of the agenda and is for information on the state of the petitions handed in at council meetings and council offices. Councillor Redser, would you mind turning your mic on? Thank you. Right, no statements on item 8. Moving on to item 9. Appointments to committees and outside bodies, statutory and other panels. Councillor Holden, do you wish to make any changes to the appointments previously made?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Pothecary, do you wish to make any changes to the appointments previously?
Yes, please, Mr Mayor. I would like to remove Councillor Gerrish and I from Standards and Audit Committee and nominate Councillor Maldoni and Councillor Cathy Kent, please.
Thank you. Councillor Spillman, do you wish to make any changes to the appointments previously made?
I do, Mr Mayor. Thank you very much. I'd like to remove myself from the Health and Wellbeing Board. Unfortunately, I can't find a replacement at the moment because the meetings are during the working day, and which is unfortunate because none of our members can make that during the working day on Friday.
Thank you, Councillor Spillman. That's duly noted. Are members in agreement with the nominations made? Thank you. Moving on to item 10, overview and scrutiny annual report 2018-19. The next item is the overview and scrutiny annual report for 2018-19 and can be found on pages 37 to 64 of the agenda. Does any member wish to speak? Do members note the recommendations in the report? Thank you. Moving on to item 11, amendments to the Constitution. Councillor Holden, would you please introduce this report?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As members will recall, there was a great deal of concern on all sides of the chamber when, in June, significant changes were proposed to the Council's Directors Board without correct oversight from members. The administration was clear on the night that changes to senior management that affect the vital service all of our residents use is a matter that must be done in consultation with members. This is the only way for local people to express their voices through their elected members and to ensure that the mechanisms are in place within the council to avoid unnecessary conflict between members and officers. On the night, myself and Councillor Hebb assured all members that the situation would go to the General Services Committee for review and that further options would be presented to full council to strengthen members' oversight and resolve the unacceptable situation that the council has put in. Tonight we have the outcome of this work, which has won cross-party support through the General Services Committee. It outlines a number of binding constitutional changes to ensure that members are always in the centre of these conversations and decisions cannot be taken without our knowledge and without our say. This is a decision that transcends administration or opposition lines, and I'm grateful to the work that the Leader of the Opposition has put into it, as well as other members and other group leaders. It means that the General Services Committee will take on new powers to appoint directors and assistant directors and review interim, acting up, restructure arrangements before they take place. Of course, in the eventuality of an emergency, we do have emergency head of paid service powers to make an urgent battlefield appointments as a form of backstop, a word I already regret using, if we lose a statutory officer suddenly, perhaps Mr Harris being caught in some sort of stampede after a Spurs game, whatever that means. It also means a greater commitment to the opposition with extended time for questions and constitutional recognition of the shadow cabinet, something I thought was necessary during my 6 years in opposition. There is additional work that will also take place that was outlined to General Services Committee, but does not form a part of this report, because this report deals with the formal mechanisms of triggering a change in the Constitution. The other issues that will return to General Services Committee include a review of member oversight of the 106 spending arrangements, something I know that Councillor Churchman, Councillor Van Day and Councillor Kelly have long since called for. A review of PERDA arrangements to ensure that election periods do not simply mean that this place locks down from a democratic point of view, and other issues. To be clear, these changes are not about any single officer, single member, single policy or single issue. They are changes to ensure that the correct democratic oversight of decisions is functioning within the council, that both allows the officers to act in a professional manner within a strong policy framework set by members. That is the only way to ensure that seemingly malign issues of administration have the oversight and consent of the 160,000 people that we are here to represent. And I hope the proposals meet members' support.
Thank you, Councillor Horton. Councillor Pothering, do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Holden, for introducing the report. I don't want to dwell on that night in June. It's a particular low point, I think, for many of us of our sort of time as councillors. Looking on the positive side, I welcome the report this evening. It's a step in the right direction to ensure that our constitution restores elected members who are, at the end of the day, accountable to the residents of Thurrock. You know, we're the people that bang on the doors and talk to people, to the heart of making key decisions that really affect our residents' lives. In my view, we have a long way to go in terms of ensuring meaningful engagement and getting people involved in the decisions that affect their lives. I think the Section 106 review that Councillor Holden mentioned is a really good starting place for that. But this paper is definitely a step in the right direction, and I shall be supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor Pothering. Councillor Spearman, do you wish to speak on the subject?
Yes, I'll keep this brief because we sat around General Services and we're all in agreement with nearly all of the points that had come forward. What I would say is I welcome the 1.5 because I do think we need to, there's a problem in this chamber with questions and accountability, especially from when I get to speak quite regularly, but some my colleagues don't have that same opportunity. Some of them, and a lot of your colleagues don't as well, and we do need to encourage that. I do think we need to look further into how we do council, not just in terms of how we structure council, but where we deliver council as well, and where we deliver committee as well. I don't think that council and committee need to necessarily be fixed in this building. I think there's room for it travelling around the borough to try and get further engagement from local people, and you know, I think we do need to constantly be looking at why it's not just as well why we get such low vote uptake in this borough, and how we can improve that.
Thank you, Councillor Spearman. Would any member like to speak on the report? Councillor Redser.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just really would like to ask whether there will be a further review in the Constitution on how long members of the public, at the moment they only get 2 minutes, which is very hard to say something in 2 minutes to get their point across. So probably that could be made to 3 minutes, but hope there will be something done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Redser. No other questions? Councillor Holden, do you wish to sum up?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Pothering, for your support. You're right, it is a step in the right direction, and obviously over the next few months with substantive appointments for Director of Place, Director of Children's Services, Monitoring Officer, we'll have plenty of opportunities to stress test the new arrangements to see how they're going. In terms of Councillor Spillman's comments, in terms of questions, his colleagues don't often get the opportunity to ask questions of their own. I would perhaps politely say that he could perhaps endeavour to yield some of his time for his colleagues, but I suppose that really is an internal matter for the TIP group, and I wouldn't really want to intrude on their grief. In regards to how committee functions, that would not require a constitutional change. Certainly when I was chairman of Children's Services, we held at least 2 meetings in different parts of the borough in schools. And in terms of members having that additional time for questions, I am a proponent of the committee structure doing a bit more work if it wants to. There is no reason that chairs and vice chairs can't ask for additional meetings. There's no reason they can't ask for additional reports. And there's no reason they can't ask cabinet members forward to answer questions. It doesn't have to be solely about the pageantry in the chamber. We recently had the task and finish group of the Alsett Hospital review, and that was a several-hour period where we must have exchanged and answered well in excess of 40 questions. So I would say that this constitutional change is to address the disparity that we saw in June and the imbalance when members were not correctly consulted on decisions. Some of the points that you're making, I think, can be exercised by perhaps if the opposition wants to slightly more robustly use the scrutiny process, that is within your gift. I think Councillor Redsaw was referring to the amount of time members of the public have to speak on petitions. Well, certainly when the next Constitutional Working Group convenes, I'm sure that's something that can be considered. With that, Mr Mayor, I move recommendations 1.1 to 1.7.
Thank you. Are members in agreement with the recommendations within the report? Thank you. Moving on to item 12, Thurrock Local Plan issues an options stage 2 report of the consultation. Councillor Coxall, would you please introduce the report? You have 5 minutes allocated for this section.
Thank you very much. Well, I know it's a very long process, but it's well-meaning and an important process towards the next 20 or 30 years of Thurrock as a borough. And I'll just give you a quick review. It's a long document. So, in 2014, the last administration gave permission to the Cabinet to start a core strategy and prepare a local plan. We then moved on into the stage 1 local plan from February to March 2016, which then was released to consultation. The releases last summer. And from there, we had to move to the second consultation, which we see in front of us tonight. That was between December and March this year, to the formal consultation process. And I must say, so an impressive array of organisations and individuals that did respond. If you can see that tonight, by close of the consultation period, we had 700 organisations and nearly 300 separate comments and responses. Given the volume of these responses, obviously it's not here tonight, but obviously you can obviously see a set of it, and we hope to actually, if you give us permission tonight, we will actually publish this consultation and the review on our website, on the council's website. And I hope tonight we can then move to the next stage. On the next stage of the process, we'll be prepared a full draft of the local plan, and it take about up to 18 months to produce these documents. And in the conclusion of that process, we'll ask again the third consultation process, formal consultation process for the draft plan into another public consultation. What I must say, and I reiterate really over and again, that this is not the plan. This is not a thing. This is a process towards the end of it. Tonight is actually publication of what people think. So we're not actually making any decisions on that. Over the next 18 months, all of us here will be participating in this process, and I hope the working groups, as much participation as you can towards producing this draft local plan at the end of this 18-month period. So we're coming to the end of it before we can actually publish. It's a long process, but it's critical, and as I said earlier tonight, it's not between the next 20 or 30 years. But it's not just about house building. It's about how we, and I'd say live, work and play, it's about how we, in the environment we want in our communities. It's not just about that. It's about the forestries that we discussed tonight. It's about the local green spaces. It's about our communities, about the infrastructure around that. Everyone looks at it and thinks about the house building and that. It's not just that. It's about the people, how we live and make improvements to our environment. If we don't do a local plan, we get it put upon us by developers, which we've seen too many times over the last 20 years since the last local plan in 1997. So we're really doing an important thing. I'm not going to take too much more time on my 5 minutes. Let's see if anyone else wants to talk. But what it is critical tonight. We just move forward, and I'm hoping we get permission from all of you, 49 of you.
Thank you, Councillor Coxall. Councillor Kieran, as Chair of the Planning, Transport and Regeneration, Labour and Scrutiny Committee, would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you for this report, Councillor Coxall. I believe since the original Issues and Options Stage 2 was published, the engagement with members has got a lot better. We've had the creation of the task force. There's been a lot more open and frequent dialogue with senior officers. And also my own committee that I chair has had a lot of time on the local plan, including this very report tonight, which last week myself, Councillor Gerrish, Councillor Allen spent well over 2 hours grilling officers on it. So really appreciate that. With the engagement though for residents, I'd like to see it go beyond your place, your voice, and go out into the community forums and resident groups that sort of run all year round, because they're the active members of the public who rain and shine, are always coming out to look after their community. And one thing which I mentioned at the committee, which I'd like to sort of directly address to you here, is talking about the duty to cooperate with the local plan, with the, London and Essex, and looking at the South Essex Joint Strategic Plan. What I want to see is something in the local plan which is a guarantee for Thurrock that we will benefit, the existing communities within Thurrock will benefit from helping out other boroughs with their housing needs, and what principles can we put into the plan to make sure that that's in place. But thank you very much for that, and I look forward to hearing your response.
Thank you, Councillor Kieran. Councillor Pothery, do you wish to speak?
Yes, please, Mr Mayor. Thank you. And thank you to Councillor Coxall for your report. I've read the document and attended one of the briefings. They were really helpful, so thank you to the officers who attended those and organised them. It's really heartening to see that a lot of the themes that we've been banging on about for a few years now are actually reflected in the consultation responses. We know that they are the deeply held concerns of our residents. And I'm really, really glad that some things like the need to tackle inequality across the borough, the need for genuinely affordable and social housing, sustainability and infrastructure-led development are all present. It will be interesting to see how those ideas are developing. What do we mean by inequalities? How would a local plan tackle those? Are some questions that obviously will need to be answered through the process, but it's really encouraging to see that they emerged as in the top themes. I'd like to just echo Councillor Kerrin's point about the proposed consultation. The design charrettes sound like a very interesting idea. We do have to make sure that obviously they're fully inclusive and that they reach all residents, and we need to make sure that we are taking advantage of our existing community forums and residents associations. I think certainly the residents associations and community forums that I work quite closely with in my ward don't currently feel like they're being engaged on key issues like this. They feel quite forgotten, and they are people who are embedded in their community and who know everybody and talk to everybody and really have their finger on the pulse in their communities. So it would be a shame if we missed out on those people. We need to make sure that they're a part of any consultation plan as well.
Thank you, Councillor Pothery. Councillor Spillman, do you wish to speak?
Yes, Mr Mayor. Now, this consultation is very helpful. You know, it tells us a lot of things that we already knew and confirms those things. It tells us some things that we didn't know that we can now start to formulate into our plan. But although this document is full of promise and aspiration, and our local plan will be full of promise and aspiration, there's a bottom line which we cannot escape from, and that's that we do not have the funds, and government aren't providing the funds to actually make the pursuit of our needs a reality. And I'm sure that as council you lobby behind the scenes, national government, but I would really like to see this council be a lot more vocal about the need for serious national investment in housing, because if we want to deliver on the hopes and dreams of most people, and the theme is here all the time, affordable housing for our young people, getting on the ladder, social housing for our old people, we can't do that on our own. We need a big building programme, we need big investment from central government, and it frustrates me that I don't hear more from you lobbying national government, because if all councils around the country did that, we'd have a lot better chance of securing that investment.
Thank you, Councillor Spillman. Councillor Holden.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I very much welcome the tone, certainly, that Councillor Apothecary and Councillor Kerrin have already articulated. As Councillor Cockshill said in his opening presentation, it's important now that all members pile in to help the future development of the plan as it goes forward. Because I'm a devastatingly exciting person, I was at Castle Point Council last night when they passed their local plan. I see Councillor Holloway nodding in furious agreement. And what really struck me were the opposition comments from the Canvey Island Independent Councillors, a collection of unreconstructed moonbats, who the arguments against creating a sensible plan that all members can sign up to was bizarre. The argument that you can be pro-Greenbelt and anti-local plan doesn't hold water. You can't be pro-affordable and council housing and anti-local plan. You cannot be pro-infrastructure, pro-investment, pro-green space, pro-new homes, new schools, new medical centres, and anti-local plan at the same time. Getting elected is about providing leadership, and simply burying your head in the sand is an obfuscation of that leadership. Tonight, I think members have struck a very reasonable tone. I feel that there will now be a more collegiate way forward, and people will heed what Councillor Cockshill has said about all members working together to help articulate that vision to take us forward. I will just slightly make a comment to Councillor Spillman about us being big and vocal in terms of other colleagues getting the investment we need. Was £250 million, Councillor Cockshill, we've had from government, £250 million? A £250 million. I'm pretty sure I put that on 100,000 leaflets in the last election, mainly because I know I at one stage spelt budget wrong. But to say that we are not big and vocal about the vast sums of investment that a Conservative government is securing in tandem with the Conservative council, I think is ever so slightly absurd. What we need to do now, going forward, above and beyond just the investment that we need, is to make sure that the local plan sits comfortably in conjunction with the other wider council policies. How do we manage HMOs as we go forward? A key tool in social care. Councillor Johnson has brought forward a paper on that. How do we make sure we build that cleaner and greener environment? We've already done that when Councillor Cockshill passed the high design standards for homes. So I think, yes, we need the investment, we are getting the investment, but now we need to chart a course to make sure that the local plan sits in tandem with the other council policies to ensure that, as you say, we deliver what is on the page.
Thank you, Councillor Holden. Councillor Worrell.
Is that it? Oh, okay.
Yes.
Sorry, it's my first go. So I welcome this. I think we've come a long, long way, you know, from the arguments in the committee rooms and, you know, we're not going to do this. And I do think that I'd like to say thank you to the officers. You know, I attended 2 of the briefings that they offered here, and Andy and his team were really open. They was really honest, you know, and answered lots of stuff about where we are on this local plan. but we do need to be mindful, you know, that housing is going to dominate. You know, where the Thames crossing goes needs to happen as soon as possible so that we can move ahead with this. You know, the longer we don't get a government response is going to hold up where our local plan goes, and then we're still going to be arguing over little pockets of greenbelt and brownfield sites and all of that stuff. It needs to happen for us to make this local plan work. And I don't much care for Brentwood and Canvey and all of them making their plans and asking us to make room for more housing here. I think it's about our residents and what's best for them, and consulting with them in a way that they feel that they are consulted. Because if they don't get consulted and we don't give them what they want, then this plan's not going to go much further. And I want to just say that when we do consult, I think that there's some mileage in speaking to some key workers as well. You know, if we're going to attract the best teachers and the best medical staff, then we need to be providing some key worker housing in our local plan. So I'd welcome if you was to find a way of being able to do that. But for me, I think it's good. I think it's nice that we've got to this stage, and I look forward to the arguments and the jostling and to get us to the next stage. This is the nice bit. I think that the hard work's just round the corner.
Thank you, Councillor Worrell. Councillor Redser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's good to see us all coming together for this. So it's brilliant to see some of the ideas on there. Some of the ideas we're not all going to agree with. You know, it's not going to please everybody, but I just wanted to really stand up and say that it's good to see in there something about the river, because Mark Koch knows I've been banging on about that for so many years, that we need to use that river more diligently than we do now. You know, then if we want to get traffic off the roads, it has to go on the river, either river taxis or something to take the strain off the road. So it's good to see that. And it's good to see some good ideas coming through from residents, from people, and we hope it carries on like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Redser. Councillor Okanale.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also like to commend where we got to at this point. I know a lot of work has been done, and consultation has been actually highlighting the wishes of the community. I also would like to see that the final document delivers on addressing the issues of inequalities, creating more balanced communities. I say this particularly for the Tilbury community to meet up in line with other areas in the borough, so that the people of community don't feel deprived going on. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rowe.
Yeah, I think I'll echo your thoughts regarding local plan. With Councillor Redser, we spoke a little while ago about the need for a more active waterfront. What I'd be sure of is that it isn't just Grays based, it actually goes right away through the length of Thurrock. I am slightly disappointed that the plan that we've got at the moment. I do feel that we are using up, or the potential using up, a lot of greenbelt. And I keep in mind the term of green spaces. So we are at risk of losing a lot. We lost some in Chadwell St Mary that used to be a playing field. It's now got council houses on it. I understand we do need to build, and we need to build, but we don't want to risk of losing any parks or open spaces. We bleat on in here about new bike tracks and fitness centres. Kids get a lot of this by playing out on the field. If we concrete over a lot of that land that they play on, they're not going to have that. Growing up for me, I was able to go out into local parks. We're losing those local parks now. It is important we have friends groups that are there to protect them, but the parks are just open land, just open green spaces. We can just go and play football. Also, when we go along with the infrastructure, I look at this, and it's got about road jams and congestion, and it's very narrow thinking. I don't see nothing about new road links with like trains, about expanding our infrastructure with rail network. And I think that should be something that should be considered within the plan going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ruff. Finally, Councillor Little.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't going to speak on this report tonight, but obviously I have done. I thank Councillor Cockshaw for his report. I very much echo what everyone else has said in the chamber, particularly Councillor Worrell, you know, about communities and what we need and actually looking at the type of things. I'm very interested in my looked after children as care leavers, places for those to go, places for there to live. I also represent a ward that has a lot of retirees who would like to have bungalows, and they don't want to go into little houses. They want houses that they can move in where they can keep their knickknacks. They don't want to throw everything out, etc. And the other thing was, I was really pleased with the consultation because part of my ward is a bit out on the limb in Bolton, and the planning had come along and asked the residents what they wanted. And we were really surprised because they were actually saying, yeah, we'd like this here and that there. And they were really getting into it. And so was the local school. And the same with Horndon and what they wanted. So I think already we've begun to be quite inclusive. And I hope we carry on. And I hope this is a journey that we can all go along together and we can all agree on and all have quite good input as well as our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Little. Councillor Cockshaw, would you like to sum up, please?
Thank you. I think that was very helpful, actually. It was, I know I was very heartened that where we've moved from till 2 tonight, and I think and I hope that continues through the next 18 months when it does get a bit harder when we get down to it in the next 18 months to produce a final draft document to go to public inquiry. There's a few things. There's a few themes that come out tonight, and I think maybe let's talk about and I think the duty to cooperate was an interesting one that's come out of and that it's an important thing that maybe members need to get more involved in, and how we deliver our local plan. We can't in isolation think Thurrock without looking at our neighbouring, and that's why the Joint Strategic Plan Group is working together. And if we look at what happened on the Thames Estuary Commission recently, we've just got the wider Thames Estuary and where we sit amongst London Plan. We got to look at what London's doing, Havering especially, and across the area. And as we build our plan, we've got to make sure we look after our green space. It's nice when you look at London and you look at South End and Castle Point, you see this Garfield Bean green bit in the middle, and we've got to make sure we've got to protect that and use it for our residents and that. But there is something that we do need to have a duty to cooperate to deliver our local plan. We need to think about that as we go forward. But with the joint strategic planning groups that are there, we're working together with our colleagues as well, and we can't do that without a benefit to Thurrock. And that's what I've always said for the last 2 years I've worked these groups. If there's a benefit, show me the benefit and we can talk about that. And I think the benefit's got to be there. What the benefit is open to the opposite, our colleagues in other boroughs. But if they want to work together, there's got to be a benefit for us to do that. And out of that, the Joint Strategic Plan, because of that, we move on to funding homes, which was just talking about the funding of homes, how we deliver and how we get more funding for our homes. It's a catch-22 here. We have to get a plan, and central government see we've got big, bold ambitions and big, bold plans for Thurrock. The money will follow. If we and exactly what's happening, it will come if we show ambition, working regularly with the officers, regularly with the department, and I'm continuously banging the drum here and all that. We are working together to try and that. We've got to get the joint plan over the line, show ambition, and then I'm confident that the funding will have to be there for these homes. Because I want to deliver inequalities. They talked about Tilbury and social homes. I think it's all about the same. What we've got to get out of this is one of the things is improving our spaces and our living environment and the place where we can live and to not just work and stay in homes and live just there. We've got to have a play area. We've got to make sure we enjoy our environment. I don't use the word place setting. It just looks too technical. So how we deliver that is through the local plan. We then can deliver great communities, and Tilbury is a fantastic opportunity which I've got personal love for because it needs some love there. It needs to be improved. It's changed.
Could you start to sum up, please?
And then key workers I think we're already doing, and the riverfront I think that's going to come forward. We need to do that. That's like that. And then Councillor Ralph, I hope you did respond in a consultation because obviously then you can see the wider group. And if you did, your comments about the rail line will definitely be in there, but maybe not enough people mentioned it to move it forward. But it definitely is there, and you've got a big voice now. In the next 18 months, make sure you turn up at the local plan meeting groups, and then we can actually put your ideas out. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coxon. Are members in agreement with the recommendations in the report? Thank you. We now move on to item 13, and that's to receive the reports from Cabinet members. There are 2 Cabinet member reports on the agenda this evening. The time allowed for this report is 15 minutes. I will take 1 question from each member, and we'll come back to those members who may wish to ask any additional questions if time allows. Please can I remind members to be as brief as possible in their questions, and also any answers, to ensure that we cover as many of the questions submitted. The report of Councillor Watkins, the Cabinet Member for Environment and Sports and Leisure, can be found on pages 89 to 110 of the agenda. Councillor Watkins, would you please introduce your report?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Members, again, good evening to you all. It continues to be an honour standing before you all, presenting to you my 3rd annual report for Environment, Sports and Leisure. As the service continues to thrive and strive for better, we continue to face new challenges, meaning we need to continue to innovate and improve. Members, since I last reported to you, we have seen improvements across Clean It, Cut It, with continued investment due to this council's strong financial position and making improvements where improvements are needed. Our streets continue to be cleaner, the grass continues to get cut, and we continue to invest in the departments where needed. Clean It, Cut It, Fill It continues to excel. To name some of the successes over the past year, our waste services continue to thrive, with weekly bin collections kept and the service continuing to achieve KPI scores over target. Our cemetery standards plan has seen complaints drop year on year and ensures that cemeteries look the way they should look and are dealt with much quicker when they don't look the way they are supposed to be looking at this period of time. We have continued to invest in our parks and open spaces, with the new equipment opened up and further investment and improvements coming to multiple parks over 2020. Importantly, we are now ensuring there is greater community involvement in what goes in our parks through the use of the park engagement officers. Our new bins are installed across streets and cemeteries, and our communal recycling pilots are seeing great successes and soon to be rolled out further, with currently consultation taking place with those who have had the pilots, so we can see how we can improve what we've done already. And a new improved household waste recycling centre got the planning permission for the improvements it desperately needs. Conservatives continue to invest in the Environment Department. There, of course, have been challenges in the Environment Department, and we have faced them head on. While we continue to buck the trend nationally on our parking investment and our Keep Britain Tidy scores, we know we have to strive for better where scores are not met. A variety of changes have been and are being made to refresh Clean It, with a move to a DEFRA standard cleaning and internal Keep Britain Tidy score monitoring, so our teams continue to share our vision for a Think for 5. Recycling continues to be challenging, and while Communal Pilot is showing success and we have launched our new recycling communications plan, we're doing much more with our recycling and making it a lot more targeted than we have done previously. And I'm also equally glad to see the energy and the work being carried out by the new cross-party waste strategy group, chaired by Councillor Fletcher. As I've always said, we face challenges head on, and I'm proud of the work the Environment Department are doing to continue making Thurrock an area we are all proud to call home, our home. We're also in the process of rolling out our new sports and leisure strategy, working with the national governing body of Sport and Sports England and sports and community groups up and down Thurrock. We are working to ensure sporting legacy is finally left in Thurrock. While our park engagement officers are speaking to communities up and down Thurrock on what our parks and open spaces can look like, need and be used for, we will shortly be engaging with sports groups as part of an updated consultation to form part of our sports and leisure strategy coming in early 2020. As I said at the start, while there have been many successes where required, and as time moves on, policy should, and this is the case with air quality. I listened with great interest in last week's Queen's speech and see reference to the government's continued commitment to fighting climate change, with new measures to be introduced, with improving air quality, recycling and protecting nature. We're responding in kind to when we see more of those plans, and we look forward to engaging with both the government and also with the wider public and members about what that will entail. I announced some weeks back that we would be reopening the air quality strategy. The Council previously passed this in 2017. Suitable for the time, but change needed now. And I said here we're exploring different opportunities, leaving no stone unturned. But members, rest assured, despite what has happened, there is much more to do. But the approach we're taking is the right approach and a test and learn model, as I kind of announced in my public questions earlier, whereby we are working cross-departmentally, ensuring that any new policy or strategy has tangible effects on both the environment and people's health. I would like to thank the team, including public health, for the work being done so far, but I equally don't want to take away the work that has gone on. I hope members can feel a sense of work that has taken place to take and improving air quality and tackling climate change. To name a few of areas where work has occurred, it is great to see the new council office buildings I've already mentioned will be BREEAM rated outstanding, meaning that we will be leading by the front on green building and kick-starting a regeneration for greys. Our new environmental fleet of vehicles are ULEZ compliant, with 98% of these vehicles being the best technology it currently has. When the next round of procurement takes place, I'm sure that technology would have moved on so that we can then go to the next step as they become more greener and electric. And there are multiple improvements and changes made to roads up and down Thurrock to tackle inappropriate use. Reduce down congestion with improvements such as the A13 road widening and east-facing slips. As I say, members, rest assured, despite what's happened, there is more to do, and CGS will have an update coming to them regarding the air quality and healthier Thurrock strategy very shortly. And I'm happy to announce as well as part of that, and it's something which has only just come out recently, one example where we are going to be kind of working as a cross-department and invigorating what we currently do is looking to amend the procurement process so that it now takes into include climate impacts. Something which we have done previously, but it needs to be at the forefront of the procurements going forward, and hopefully that will become part of that. As I say, we as a council are serious about improving air quality and tackling climate change. Am I running out? Am I? Members, as a service, we continue to tackle the challenges head on, thrive and improve, and strive for better. I would like to thank as ever members of the team for their amazing work they do, and I would equally like to thank community groups and volunteers up and down Thurrock for all that they do. Members, with that, I'd like to end my report and I look forward to taking your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Watkins. Councillor John Kent, as Chair of the Cleaner, Greener and Safer Overview and Scrutiny Committee, would you like to speak?
Page 104 talks about the plans for the Household Waste and Recycling Centre at Linford. Mr Mayor, we now know that the cost of these plans is £3.5 million. Can the portfolio holder tell us two things? First of all, specifically what we're getting for our £3.5 million. And secondly, we're told that work is hoped to start early next year, as early as January, and there may be need to put in place a temporary alternative site. Can the portfolio holder tell us which sites are under consideration for that?
Councillor Watkins.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Kent, for your question as well. Very good question, actually, and I'm glad to be speaking about it. It was a great honour that I was there to present and speak at the time of planning when it went forwards. And as I spoke about at that planning meeting, there was multiple changes being taken to that site. Currently, and I think most imperatively, is accessibility for our residents to be able to use the site. I mean, it's stupid and crazy that residents still have to walk up steps to be able to put stuff into the containers or the bins. Moving forward, one of the biggest improvements of the site will be that it will be at a flat level as vehicles drive up, so all users across the borough will be able to put stuff into the site, which is a marked improvement. It will also be a much bigger site than it currently is to ensure that we can take in more waste. Another great initiative which will be done through the new site is the reuse section of it. So we'll be opening up to charities so that instead of just TVs and fridges and all that stuff being dumped and just unfortunately then taken away, but anything which can be salvageable and can be given to those who need it can be used. We look forward to working with any charities who wish to step forward and work with the council as part of that. And in regards to the second point to your question, yes, there are the work will be starting as soon as we can do. What we are currently looking to do is actually try and remain on site as much as we physically can for that period of time, and we are working with the contractors to do so that we can try and stop as much disruption to residents and that they can still access the site while the developments are taking place.
Thank you, Councillor Watkins. Councillor Pothegary, do you wish to speak?
Yes, please, Mr Mayor. Thank you. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Watkins, for your report. I was trying desperately to say that I believe it was Councillor Rigby's tree planting motion earlier before. But given the stagnant and disappointing performance of this council in increasing recycling rates and the success of the pilot mentioned in section 6.8, introducing recycling for flats at 2 sites in my ward, working with me and some of my Keen Bean residents. Will the portfolio holder now commit the funds to roll out the pilot to all flats across the borough?
Councillor Watkins.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor, for your question. I do believe, actually, if I'm right, it was Councillor Redsill, but apologies if I did get that wrong. But we all supported it, and we're all part of that motion, I'd like to believe. It's a very good thing. You are right regarding the recycling scores and recycling as a whole within Thurrock. As I always do stress, we as a council will always do the most we can do to try and tell people to recycle, but it is fundamentally down to the resident to put the stuff in the right bins. We do have the cross-party working group currently going, and it's not only just looking at the waste strategy. One of the fundamental aims of that is in how we can have better engagement with residents, but also what needs to be done a little bit differently to try and improve recycling. Working, and I don't want to steal Councillor Fletcher's thunder on this, there is a plan to do a consultation out to all residents in the borough. They will be receiving a postcard which was signed off by the group. It's a fantastic work which the group are doing, which will be seeking feedback about how we move forward with the waste strategy. But fundamentally, part of those questions is also around recycling and how residents feel about recycling currently, so then that can feed into our plans and what we need to do a bit differently. Regarding the pilot schemes, you are correct. We do want to roll it out, but we want to roll it out correctly so that the sites in which, the communal sites where they have the ability to recycle, but they are going to recycle. So at this period of time, we'd still like to do a phased approach. We've got, as I say, a consultation going out to the pilots currently just to seek feedback on what went well, what didn't go so well, what can we do a little differently. We have sites already identified where we'll be moving on to next. Obviously, it's really imperative that we have the residents' engagement with that process, because we don't want to put the bins there for them not to recycle correctly, which then penalises us when it gets taken to the sites to be disposed of, and then fines, unfortunately, entail from the back of that. So it's really key that the residents are on board with this, so that they both have the education, understanding, and will drive in order to recycle.
Thank you, Councillor Watkins. Councillor Spillman.
I was going to ask a question about the spectacularly awful recycling rates in Thurrock, to be honest, but Councillor Puffcarry got there before me. What would you say, you've got quite a big portfolio now, obviously, because you've taken on sports, recycling. In terms of, I get a lot of negative feedback from sports groups that that we don't support people enough, that they feel unloved. That they don't feel as though the council are really on their side. What reassurance can you give to them that that's not the case? And what action can we take to, as a council, do you think, to promote our sports clubs a bit more than we do?
Councillor Watkins.
I actually spoke at the Thurrock Sports Awards 2 weeks ago in front of a multitude of sports groups. Thank you very much. Speaking about both my passion and commitment in order to try and live a bit better sporting legacy than what the council and councils and those administrations from days gone by. I'm not going to blame anyone for this, but it hasn't necessarily been the focus, and it is now a focus, and that's the reason why I has announced in my speech this evening that the sports and leisure strategy is due to be coming forward. 2 members at committee early 2020. All those sports groups, as alluded to as well, will be going out to consultation very shortly. This is the second round of consultation to update the results which they had previously given, so that we can get a better understanding of where they are now compared to when they last did it. And we're working with the local plan, but we know the need in order to ensure that we get this sporting strategy right, so that we can work out and know exactly how we provide both the right assistance and understanding for those sports groups, so we know what they need, what needs to be done a little bit differently for what we can provide. But also what the community want as well plays a massive part, and I really want the park engagement officers, they are still relatively new and have got a long way to go in their 3-year pilot scheme, but they're not just working with the community groups just to get an understanding of what play equipment's needed in parks, but what actual sports equipment is needed in those parks. Does a particular park need football and tennis, or does a particular park need football and cricket? This is the role in which only the community will be able to tell us what they need and what the sports groups want, and that's the role of both the park engagement officers and then what the new consultation will feed into as part of the sports and strategy legacy.
Thank you, Councillor Watkins. This item should have finished now, but we do have a few questions which I'm prepared to allow. but if you could answer them all en masse at the end, please, Councillor Watkins. And could the questioners please make it a question rather than a statement? Thanks very much indeed. So we'll start with Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On Monday this week, I went to the Linford amenity site to dispose of some rubbish. I was armed with a utility bill to prove my Thurrock residency. However, on the couple of occasions that I went, they didn't check this. I thought it might be a one-off. Having spoken to others, this isn't actually the case, and they're not checking that the people are actually living in the borough. I wonder, has the policy changed? And if it hasn't, will you enforce it so that we are sure that we're only paying for the disposal of the waste from Thurrock residents only? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Worrell.
See, that's an entrance. That's an entrance. I'm aware that there's currently been a parks strategy is being developed by the officers. When will this strategy be complete, or at a stage where all councillors would be able to see this strategy? And will this strategy have clear action plans for each and all of the parks across the borough?
Thank you, Councillor Worrell. Councillor Muldowney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Watkins, for your report. I'm concerned about the length of time it's taking Council to respond to reports of fly tipping in Chadwell. There have been a number of incidents. Just one example, in Scott Road, it's taken 6 months for fly tipping to be removed after being reported by councillors and residents and also councillors. I myself was told on 3 separate occasions that the fly tipping had been removed before it actually was removed. When I looked at how this was being reported, it wasn't clear to me how we're reporting performance on this. So can Councillor Watkins confirm how the Council's performance on fly tipping is being monitored or will be monitored going forward, so we can ensure we improve on this poor performance? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In regards to air quality and pollution in our borough, we often see in these reports the PM 2.5s and PM 10s that are measured in our AQMA sites, but we never really hear of the dirt and dust pollution in the area, like my poor Tilbury residents have had to put up with. We've found high metals with some serious substances in that dirt and dust, such as arsenic. And I'd like to know what is the long-term improvement that Council intends to mitigate the unwanted and potentially dangerous fallout. Thank you.
Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Watkins. Just really following up on Councillor Worrell's question around the park strategy. As you'll be aware, there's a lot of good work being done by a number of CICs, particularly Hardy Park and Bonnygate Wood. And I'd like basically to ask the councillor to make sure that this park strategy integrates the work they're doing and takes a look at how the council can work with them, because I think there's a lot that we can learn from them. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Redson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be short. I just wanted to thank the portfolio holder for all the hard work that goes in, because I know the borough is looking good at the moment. Just giving a little bit to the schools, Councillor Watkins. The schools, the little primary schools, are doing a lot to recycle, and I think perhaps we should be getting in the schools and into the secondary schools just to give them a little bit of a lift. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edgell. And finally, Councillor Rowe.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to come back down to the air quality figures. As you know, I've asked before to have them published and to be made more accessible to the public. Is there a way that we could, going forward, having these published in the local paper or highlighting stations that fail any, or comes within, say, like 10% of any limits, so we can look up at them and keep a track record of them? Thank you, Councillor Rowe.
Councillor Watkins, can you please sum up? You're meant to have 2 minutes for this item, but I'm going to be really generous and I'm going to give you 3.
Oh, thank you. Might be needing 5. No, honestly, thank you so much for your questions. They are really important. I'll try and go through them list by list as I noted them down. So if I do miss one by mistake, shout at me. Regarding the HWRC, it is still policy that it is only for Thurrock residents. So if there is any issues, particularly as you've alluded to this evening, they will be investigated thoroughly to ensure that is not the case, because it is right that only Thurrock residents should be disposing of rubbish within the HWRC. To answer, I suppose, 2 questions regarding parks. The park strategy was originally approved back in 2017, I believe, which was the initial parks which were going to be seeing some funding from which we'd allocated towards them. That has developed on quite a bit. If you look at page 100, there are multiple parks in under 5.4, which show that there is varying different stages of work that's going to be going on within those parks. What's really key moving forward, and the strategy is evolving, you know, it's not just a one-stop shop strategy which comes forward and that's it, it's done and dusted. It's an evolving strategy which continues to evolve. Some of these parks weren't originally on that list, so that continues to improve as time goes on. The park engagement officers are going to be key to this moving forward, because they're going to be telling us exactly what the residents and community groups want in their parks. There's no point in the council going and putting a load of equipment in which the residents are not going to use and not ask for, and it won't necessarily get the full love it deserves to get. So that's why the park engagement officers are there, so that we can seek the feedback from the people who are using the parks and the residents around to know what they are after in their parks, and then we can change the parks and evolve them to what the residents and the communities need. And you are quite right, but there are many, many great community groups already exist out there, and what the park engagement officers will also be doing is trying to create more of those community groups. So it's not just necessarily always down to the council to know what's best. You know, this is what I'm saying. The Friends of Hardy Park, as you've alluded to, have taken ownership of that park and are doing a lot of good work internally with the help of the council, but they're doing it on their own, and because they know what the people are after, and I think that's equally key. But as I say, it's not the council just saying what you should have in, it's the residents telling us what they're after so that we can work towards them. Fly tipping, I do apologise to hear about that. That is unacceptable. Any fly tipping which is reported into the council will be looked into straight away by our enforcement teams, and also our street cleaners have the ability as well to go and see if there is any potential documentation in there which can then take them back to resident or whoever may have disposed of that, illegally disposed of that rubbish. And then it would be cleaned up very quickly. That's the way it should be. I'll investigate that. I'd always say that if you have any particular concerns about communication, you know, you can contact myself or Councillor Hewlin as well, whose portfolio covers that basis as well. So if there's any particular concerns, then please do. But we'll make sure that's a bit more robust moving forwards. Regarding air quality for the environment, well, Tilbury, let's just say, obviously there is a section in the report which is indicating some of the work which the Environment Agency are doing with Tilbury. And it's great to see that they are now doing the monitoring and so introducing that testing to see what is going on at particular sites, which I'm not going to allude to, I've alluded to before. As part of the air quality strategy moving forward, and I've said this before, it shouldn't have come to you to take, well, for Ms Swash to take a question at the council in order for the agency to have been set up. And that's why one of the reasons we have reopened the strategy, so that it can have greater interaction with the environmental agency partners out there. So Environment Agency, if we take Tilbury, the Port of Health, Port of Tilbury, Health, etc., so that we have much more robust conversations with them where we are needing to, so that we can be dealing with those issues a lot quicker. And that's going to play a key, vital role moving forward with those sites. Equally the same as alluded to in the last month's council meeting from Councillor Mays regarding the issue regarding the smells coming through. Again, you know, we'll be engaging with partners where we have to in order to try and get those issues either resolved or more understood. And regarding the integration, this list goes on, regarding the integration of air quality, no, you are right, it's very key that we are a bit more transparent and open about what we're doing. Obviously, I don't want to cause public concern and scare at the same time as well. And that's why, as I say, there is a paper which will be coming to CGS, which I really want, you know, it's coming there so that I can seek feedback from the members of that group. And any suggestions will be put forward so that it can form part of how it's going to look moving forwards. I know that we have a couple of motions and amendments this evening, which will also potentially see the creation of different groups as well, which will then feed into that and form part of that, and we'll likely see the stats with that as well. Regarding schools, yes, the recycling and the work which they are doing, we should be tapping into a little bit more. We have done it previously, 2 occasions, one with our new waste vehicles, so every school had the ability to put forward suggestions to name the bins, waste bins, and only recently as well, we've engaged with a load of schools about a new turn off your engine campaign as well, to put new posters up outside schools and train stations, so to remind residents to turn off their engines. Those are posters designed by kids and they're going up shortly, and it's been a fantastic contribution from them. And again, as part of the strategy, we will be engaging with those more. And that's it. Again, pleasure speaking to you all. I know I could talk for hours about this. I'm passionate about it. I'm proud to see the work which we do, but I would like to say, moving forwards, air quality is going to improve. It's one of the biggest things we're doing as a council, and improving our sports strategy as well.
Thank you, Councillor Watkins. I thought I'd give you 3 minutes because you might take 4. You've ended up taking 5, but never mind. But, moving on to the next item, which is item 14, which is the second report of Councillor Manny, the Cabinet Member for Highways and Transport. Can be found on pages 111 to 122 of the agenda. Councillor Manny, would you please introduce your report?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's a pleasure to introduce my first report as a Cabinet Member for Highways and Transport. Mr Mayor, as evidenced by the breadth of subjects covered in my report, this portfolio is a wide and varied one and covers many of the services which our residents care most about. I'll therefore try to focus on the areas which I believe matter most to local people and indeed elected members. Mr Mayor, the maintenance of our highway network is vital to businesses and residents alike, and the Council continues to meet the challenges of ensuring that our roads are fit for purpose. As explained at 2.1, the Council is responsible for 545 kilometres, or if you prefer, like me, 338 miles of road network, along with 27,000 lighting units and 117 overhead structures, all of which are regularly inspected and maintained. So far this year, 19 Thurrock roads have been resurfaced and many more repaired. To date, Mr Mayor, the Council has carried out 1,156 inspections of the network, and this has resulted in 3,285 pothole repairs. I'm delighted that the Council has exceeded its annual target of 98% pothole repair within the allocated time frame. We know that potholes are a major source of annoyance for motorists, yet here in Thurrock we have shown once again the positive impact of our Clean It, Cut It, Fill It initiative. In addition to repairing our roads, Mr Mayor, the Council is ensuring that the borough's drainage network remains free-flowing, thereby reducing the risk of flooding. The Council has recently taken delivery of 2 brand new gully cleansing machines, which will ensure a big increase in the number of gullies we can maintain, with 11,629 already attended to between January and August this year. As a ward councillor, I recall a time when residents would regularly contact me and complain about blocked drains and the problems this causes. But with this new investment, residents will no longer have to complain before they receive what is a frontline service. We're also listening to residents in other ways. As car ownership grows, so do parking pressures, and in some parts of the borough. The successful £1 million Curbit initiative has seen a number of schemes implemented from Aveley to Corringham. These have helped maximise on-street parking and in many cases improve the visual amenity of the local area. The success of Curbit is evident and has benefited many local residents who would otherwise continue to face the daily dilemma of where to park. Having reflected on this success, I can advise that we will continue to explore ways of extending Curbit into other areas. In July, Mr Mayor, the Cabinet improved the integrated transport block, which details how we will invest Thurrock's £971,000 funding allocation from government in line with the Council's transport strategy. Of particular note is the money that is allocated to the Safer Routes to School programme, which will ensure that at least 10 schemes are implemented each year around local schools. Those schools with the highest accident data and which have made progress in producing valid school travel plans will be prioritised, meaning the safety of our school children remains a priority. And further evidence of what the Council is doing can be seen at paragraph 5 of the report. Mr Mayor, it has to be said that the essential highways and transport service is of course enforcement, and I'm keen to ensure this remains firm but fair. Where the rules are flouted, the Council must act. Our enforcement officers patrol the borough daily and focus particularly on known hotspots. This includes around our schools, where in the worst cases the Council is exploring new ways of enforcement, including via the use of CCTV. This is something I give my personal approval to, and I hope that we can begin piloting the new measures soon. We're also taking action to tackle nuisance HGVs, again something which our residents demand. Inappropriately parked HGVs cause damage to our footpaths or grass verges, and this is nothing short of antisocial behaviour. Mr. Mayor, 8.4 of the report details some of the actions we are taking, but it is now envisaged that we go further. Nuisance HGV parking often takes place at night after our enforcement officers have completed their shifts. In an effort to deal with this, it is proposed that we implement a night shift, which will involve officers working after dark to enforce against HGVs. Whilst this will be the main aim of the operations, officers will also be ready to deal with other infringements too, meaning that we will be enforcing on behalf of our residents around the clock. Aside from enforcement, the Council has also looked at freight management initiatives, including in Rectory Road in Little Thurrock, where HGV access to and from the Globe Industrial Estate has been limited and a width restriction installed at the junction of Rectory Road and Lodge Lane. Elsewhere, Mr. Mayor, restrictions have been implemented in Woodview and Little Thurrock and along the Dock Approach Road in Tilbury, thereby preventing HGVs parking near residential areas. A further scheme is also being considered in respect of Averley so that we can prevent lorry movements through the village. Mr. Mayor, I'd also like to talk about the Council's introduction of permit parking areas in Grays, Tilbury and Stamford. These schemes came about after months of planning and consultation and are designed to ensure that residents living in areas with high levels of commuter parking can park in their own streets. Overall, these schemes have been well received by those they seek to benefit, and resident complaints remain very low. The schemes will remain subject to periodic reviews, and amendments have already been made in some cases to ensure that they are embedded with minimal impact to the immediate community. Mr. Mayor, I'd also like to take the opportunity to restate the Council's commitment to a new two-way traffic system in Grays Town Centre. As a Grays area councillor myself, this is something I very much support, and I'm able to recall the introduction of the one-way system some years ago, which along with many others, including Grays residents and businesses, I failed to see the merits of. A new two-way traffic system will be no small undertaking, and extensive works are needed in order to deliver this essential project. Works are scheduled to begin imminently, and during this time every effort will be made to ensure the smooth delivery of the works and to protect residents and businesses from disruption. Lastly, Mr. Mayor, given that we are now well into autumn, I think it would be an opportune time to touch on the Council's plans for winter gritting. The Council has begun weather monitoring and is preparing to install our own local weather station, thereby giving us better weather reports. I can advise that adequate stocks of grit have been obtained, and should the needs arise, our teams are able to carry out operations and keep our roads safe and moving. As mentioned at the start of my speech, Mr. Mayor, I try to focus on some of the issues that I think matter most to local residents. But as ever, I remain willing to discuss with individual members any issues which they have in their respective wards, and I'm happy to answer any questions now. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kieran, as Chair of Planning, Transport and Regeneration Overview and Scrutiny Committee, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Maney, for your report. With regards to 8.2 with the civil enforcement officers, just keen to know sort of how many there are, because unless I've missed it, it's not in the report. I welcome the night shift element that you've mentioned to help tackle the problems there, but I think there are too few officers on patrol, and the evidence is out there with the new enforcement areas in Tilbury, the continuing issues around Seabrook Rise, the relentless task of patrolling town centres and schools. It's a big job, and I think we need more officers. So what I'm really asking is, do you agree with that assessment that we need more officers, and will you look into beefing up the number of officers we have on patrol around the streets of Thurrock?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It will probably come as no surprise, but enforcement across the board is something that I believe passionately in. As I said, where the rules are flouted, they should be enforced. It's not about going after people who aren't doing anything wrong. It's about enforcing rules that are in place. And very often by doing that, it makes life better for other residents. We don't put waiting restrictions or resident parking schemes in place for the fun of it. They're there to address a problem in the first place. And I agree, the team is small. It does a lot of work for a small team. But if there was ever a way of increasing the number of enforcement officers, I would wholeheartedly support it. Obviously, the money that we bring in, the myth is that councils, enforce because it boosts their coffers. That's simply not the case. any money we bring in, the service is self-funding, so it has to fund itself, and any money that is generated in surplus is reinvested back into these kind of schemes. So I wholeheartedly agree with you. We are extending the number of residence parking schemes. Across the ward, we're looking at new waiting restrictions to improve visibility and the free flowing of arrows, and these have to be enforced. If they're not, they're completely ineffective. So going forward, I would, wholeheartedly support more investment. That has to come from somewhere, obviously. If it doesn't come from another service, if it's not self-generated, it has to come from council tax, and that resources are finite. But I agree. As members, we want more out of our enforcement team. Our residents expect more out of what's a very small team. And there will come a point, I think, where we have to look at that and ask, is it time to expand it? And I would always support that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Pothecary, do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Maney, for your report. Looking around the borough, we have a number of key transport projects that are not, shall we say, going to plan. The Buckingham Hill Road junction works have been a bit of a disaster. The Stamford interchange has been stalled for over 6 months with only a closed station to show for itself. And there are now reports emerging that the A13 widening might be delayed by up to 10 months. And it has taken 4 years for you to get anywhere near the completion of the Grays 2A working system project, and it's not finished yet. Does this administration really have the determination to see through these kinds of schemes, which could have major impacts on improving transport links, road safety, and reducing congestion and pollution?
Councillor Manning.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't think there's any doubt that this administration is determined to deliver some of these projects, and in case of the Grays two-way system, that's really about undoing a wrong from a previous Labour administration. As I say, I've been here long enough to remember when that was implemented. Residents were against it, businesses were against it, and we are now putting right a road system that should never have been put in the first place, and at great cost to the taxpayer. I'm confident we can deliver all of these schemes. Some of them are major undertakings. They are going to run into problems. There are going to be unforeseen issues, but I'm confident we will deliver them. And I have every confidence in the officers that are leading on them. I've met most of them now, and they are determined to see these through. I think it's fair to say that in the early stages of some of these schemes, there were things that could have been done better. We can't undo what has been done, but going forward, as I say, I'm confident that they'll be delivered. I'm confident that the right people are in place. I'm confident that they have the right support at the very top, and there is absolutely a political will to deliver all these major projects. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Spillman, do you wish to pose a question?
Yes, I do. The A13 widening, it's been said by certain people that it was poorly planned, poorly designed, and that it's significantly over budget and significantly delayed as well. Can you tell me what sort of delay on the original timing there was for the project and how much over budget we are?
Councillor Manning.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You're quite correct. There has been a delay, and there are rumours. It's true that the costs have spiralled. I don't want to say anything that might prejudice some of the things that are being done at the moment. Looking into that, there is a thorough investigation into what has happened. If we don't do that, we don't learn from some of the mistakes that have been made. And it is fair to say that mistakes along the way have been made. It could have been planned for, it could have been managed much better. But as I said in my previous answer, I genuinely believe that the right people are now in place and are overseeing the project and are doing their best to get it on track. I don't want to make excuses, but I do think we have to appreciate the scale of this of the works. There are, as I say, always things that weren't planned for, and I know that some of the utilities that running under the road have been an issue. that, as I said, that's not an excuse. You expect those kind of things to crop up in this kind of project. But be under no doubt, no one is denying the challenge before us. No one is denying the things that have happened, that have led to this stage. But all focus at the moment is on delivering that project and as quickly as possible. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Manning. We're fastly running out of time. I'm going to allow some questions on this, but as before, can you make them a question rather than a long-running statement? And I may have to even curtail some of the last questions, but it's up to you, the members, how many we get through by how brief you are in your and forthright you are in your questions. So the first one is Councillor Duffy.
Thank you. I'll keep this nice and short. Just with 11.2, there seems to be an oversight of Stamford Hope missing on the list where works have commenced at the station. It began and then nothing's happened since. Depending who you ask, it's somebody else's fault. Can we just have an update on when this is going to be starting again, when it's going to be completed, and when it will stop causing residents hell on a daily basis?
Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your report, Councillor. Councillor, you mentioned the Curbit scheme, which I believe has been a real help to a number of areas around the borough. To the extent that I've been trying to get a couple of areas in Ockenden onto the scheme, I keep getting told there's no money. So I'm very interested to hear that you're keen to keep it going. Really, my question is the money going to be there to keep this scheme up and running?
Thank you. Councillor Roccanale.
Thank you, Councillor Maney, for your report. I just want to say that the state of some roads in Tilbury are very ugly and very poor and need resurfacing. For example, it's like a Dunlop Road and all those roads. So I just want to ask you, when do we expect that you will look into these roads, please?
Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, can I say it's a shame we have to revert to political point scoring once again in chamber. But on a serious note, regarding the HGVs and trailers being carelessly and illegally parked, Councillor Maney, you probably are aware of the bus stop that's located near Brett's Farm, which is just off of Marshfoot that enters onto the A1089. Now, this bus stop, I believe, only serves the 3 houses along that road. Now, surely that's got to be put into question whether that is used at all, that bus stop, because every time I go past there, I either see a lorry parked in it or a trailer. Now, what do you intend to do with that bus stop to stop the parking, the illegally parking of those HGVs and trailers? Thank you.
Councillor Ralph.
Yeah, regarding the Stamford Hope train station, there was a feasibility study went on for quite some time, and I believe this was demolished without the final plans being put into place, and also failed collection of monies that were ready to be opened up to the project twice. I think July 2018 we failed to collect money for that project. Is this going to have a knock-on effect on the project, and are their final plans ready now?
Councillor Coxhill.
Yes, just on 9.1 and 9.2. Obviously 9.1, after I was struggling to drive into facing slips and massively interfere with my ward, and especially at Christmas time into the Lakeside Basin area. I'm thinking everyone's realised the problems that has. Obviously, I'm very pleased. Last year at the Conservative Party conference, they announced nearly £50 million to move forward, and I'm glad to see that's moving forward. But it's 9.2, which I'm more worried about. It's obviously a pinch point there. We can all see that. That's a major one. There is a failure in the late 80s to deliver east-facing slip roads. We can see other issues coming through the Lower Thames Crossing on that. I know that's not tonight. But we've also it mentions here in 9.2 that the council needs to submit some extra government money, another up to £75 million a year for us. So if we know as councillors, I know how I can talk as cabinet member and make sure that we can get that on there. But I'm sure that 49 other councillors here need to, say, in their wards, if there is a pinch point that does affect economic growth, we need to make sure that is in here and able to be to you as a cabinet member to make sure we can actually get the money that the government is offering us instead of letting it go, and we've only got until 2020.
Thank you, Councillor Cochrane. And finally, Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Maney, thank you. Great report. My question comes from 6.3 about the new average speed camera system now on South End Road. It seems to have dragged or pushed a lot of the traffic from the South End Road down Branksome Avenue instead. Could we have something similar in Branksome Avenue, or if not for these speed cameras, average speed cameras themselves, what steps would we be able to make in order to slow the traffic down? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. Right, Councillor Manny, if you could answer those questions and go on to
All of them.
Just the odd one.
go on to summing up. I'm going to allow you 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be as brief as I can, but you will allow these questions. Firstly, Mr. Mayor, turning to Stamford Station, another, important project in the borough. I don't think anyone underestimates the importance of that. Again, could that have been managed better? Possibly. Obviously, that started before I became the portfolio holder, so it's not something that, I've been following all the way through. I have, again, been briefed on that fully. There are issues around land acquisition. There are issues around the creek, and the council possibly having to negotiate the purchase of a land that it didn't anticipate having to purchase, and that has slowed the project down. I can only repeat the assurance that I have been given that there are no major obstacles that cannot be overcome. I hope it can be delivered as quickly as possible. There may be some further delays along the way, but there are legalities involved and there are other engineering issues involved which have to be overcome. I'm happy to report back on that, or meet with any councillor from the East who wants to specifically talk about that and get you a full briefing. But I can only say again, there are issues there. No one is denying that the project is not where it should be, but we will move it forward as quickly as we can, and we're working with our partners to do that. Councillor Fletcher, you mentioned Curbit. Indeed, that was one-off funding from an overspend, more evidence of good budget management. I'm hoping that if there is another surplus in the budget, things like Curbit will receive more funding. I can advise that the council has submitted capital bids for more schemes, so there are a number of ways we can fund additional Curbit schemes. You're right, nothing is built in the budget for that, but there is a number of avenues where I think we can get additional funding from, and if we can, we will certainly take that forward. I think the schemes that have been implemented so far have been a real success. We need more schemes. Many of our communities were designed at a time when car ownership couldn't be envisaged by modern standards, and we need to do more to provide additional parking so that some of the other problems we mentioned when I was addressing the question from Mr. Perrin can be alleviated. Roads in Tilbury. As I said in my report, there are daily inspections of the road network. All roads are inspected, and where defects are found that require intervention, they will be repaired. My message really to members is that if you have roads in your ward which you think are in a poor state of repair or have defects, then report them to officers. That's what they're there for. I mean, by all means, bring it to the attention of the chamber, but just driving down the road and thinking, well, this is a poorly maintained road, I'll wait till next full council, is probably not the best way to do it. We have a good team of officers. They will gladly respond to any member inquiries. I know even before I was a portfolio holder, if I raised an issue in my ward, I didn't just get a standard reply. I know they'd been to see it, and I know they'd inspected it. And as I say, if it requires intervention, it will get intervention. The bus stop that Councillor Allen referred to, again, similar issue. I mean, rather than driving past it, report it. You know, if there are HGVs violating any kind of parking restriction, or if they are illegally parked in bus stops, we need to have that kind of intelligence. I've just said we are stepping up our enforcement activity. That will be around the clock, and you know, I'm sure officers have heard what you said. We now know about this particular incident, and if HGVs are parking there in violation of any restrictions, or you know, occupying space which is designated as a bus stop, we'll take action, and I'll ask officers to do that. Councillor Coxall, I don't think there's any question there. You just hijacked my report to make a mention of the east-facing slips. Again, you know, something we desperately need. Fully support it, but I don't think there's much more I can say to that. And Councillor Collins, finally, Branksome Avenue. It's one of those cases where you do something to alleviate a problem. It's something that is, you know, a long time coming, and it just causes another problem to crop up. So I think there's some debate about whether or not additional traffic has been driven onto Branksome Avenue. I know that ward members think that that has resulted in a problem. The only thing I can say to you is we are looking at Branksome Avenue. We are doing traffic impact assessments. We're measuring the speed of traffic that is travelling down Branksome Avenue, and what comes out of that will determine what kind of intervention, if any, Branksome Avenue gets. I don't think there is probably a councillor in this chamber who hasn't got some kind of, some road they would like treated with a traffic calming measure. There's a road in my ward which, after 18 years of being a councillor, I'm still trying to get speed traffic calming measures in. It's one of those things which, you know, we all want in our ward, but there just isn't enough of the budget to go around. But specifically, I can say in respect of Branksome Avenue, it is being looked at, and if the evidence supports any form of intervention or any form of traffic calming measures, then obviously we'll look at bringing that forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Manny. Moving on to item 15, questions from members to answer questions from members in the order in which they were submitted. We're up to 30 minutes with this item. There are 2 questions to the leader and 6 questions to cabinet members. These can be found on pages 123 to 124 of the agenda. Can I please ask members to be as brief as possible in their questions and answers to ensure we cover as many of the questions submitted tonight. Those questions not dealt with at this meeting, the member to whom the question is addressed shall provide a written answer as soon as practical after the meeting. I would like to remind members that any supplementary question they ask must be one question that relates to the original question and not form part of a statement. For the benefit of the recording of this meeting, I would ask those members who have submitted questions to please read out their question when asked to do so. Questions to the Leader of the Council will be responded to by Councillor Horn. Question 1. Councillor Pothecary, please read out your question as set out on page 123 of the agenda.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So, can the portfolio holder provide an update on joint working between the council and other agencies to ensure we are working to prevent those at risk of being drawn into gang activity or taking appropriate enforcement action against gang members?
Councillor Horn.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. So I haven't actually had the formal opportunity to congratulate Councillor Pothecary on the upcoming birth of her child, and I'm sure it gives us some comfort to know 100% of the early years centres in her ward are rated outstanding. We are building 1,000 new school places in her ward. And it is my personal pledge to your unborn child that this administration will stay in power for as long as humanly possible to give your child the best start in life. Mr Mayor, we're doing a number of things to work with partner agencies. We have rebuilt the youth offending service that was cut under the previous administration, establishing brand new gang functions very specifically within the service. As you know, our re-offending rate amongst young people is lower than the national average. With a now expanded team with greater capacity, our youth offending service is doing far more work interacting with schools and you'll see this year the annual public health report is going to be dedicated to the issues of vulnerability. So how can we bring the public health services such as mental health together with schools and together with the youth offending service to provide that holistic support. In addition to that, we've provided over £1 million of joint working with the police to go after youth gangs. Having served well over a dozen injunctions, we have virtually crippled a youth gang in this borough, and we have substantially more work, more joint working with the police, with special operations due to come forward in the very near future.
Thank you. Councillor Pothery, do you wish to pose a supplementary question?
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Horton, and thank you for your good wishes, I think. In January, I asked Councillor Gledhill what Thurrock Council was doing to work with the Home Office to better coordinate with other areas about the resettling of gang members in Thurrock. And I guess my question is, what has Thurrock Council been doing since January on this specific issue?
Councillor Horton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, first of all, it's important to view this in a context. You know, Thurrock is not an island in itself. We have to work in a broader relationship with the Youth Justice Board to ensure that people who are settled either inside of Thurrock or very near to Thurrock are properly monitored. We've secured over £140,000 from the Essex Violence and Vulnerability Unit to aid this work. We are doing additional work to ensure that if gang members are resettled here, or if people, more critically, who could be susceptible to being drawn into a gang are settled here, we have the right resources in place. I've already made the announcement that we intend to bring forward an exciting plan to bring our Inspire youth services together with the Youth Offending Service, along with our mental health services, to ensure that we're doing proactive outreach, the type of young people who we know are at risk of being groomed by gangs. In addition to that, at the last head teachers briefing, we rolled out a new protocol with the Youth Offending Service regarding the existing powers that schools have for stop and search in schools in relation to gang-related activity, and what the correct referral pathway is, both so Thurrock Council and the police can intervene with appropriate sanctions against potential gang members, but also so we can intervene to ensure that the presence is in the classroom, in the corridors, and in the playground, to ensure that those who may be susceptible to this type of grooming are appropriately supported to give them far better life chances than they otherwise would have had.
Councillor Pothery, do you wish to pose a second supplementary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your response. And I do appreciate, Councillor Horton, that you may not have you may not be fully sort of over this brief. All of what you've talked about sounds very positive in dealing with one particular aspect of this. The aspect that I'm quite interested in is what was shared in the Vice article in the summer of 2018, where the specific issue was identified that we just didn't know, and other agencies didn't know, that members of gangs were being resettled as part of a kind of rehabilitation programme in Thurrock, and we had, you know, people from rival gangs in nearby streets. Obviously, Thurrock is probably not actually far enough away sometimes from the original gangs. We've got fairly good transport links into London, etc. So the issue seemed to be that the agencies just didn't know that they were here and weren't able to either mediate that process or give them the support and put in the safeguarding arrangements that were needed. Can I ask what we are doing about that specific issue?
Councillor Horton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, first of all, I would say that obviously it wouldn't be genuine for me to say that coordination between agencies isn't a problem. Of course it is. It's a very, very complex issue. What I'm trying to be very cautious of is that I don't want Councillor Pothery to inadvertently draw me into certain specifics, because that wouldn't actually be helpful for the outcome she's trying to achieve. The example I would draw is prior to us serving over a dozen injunctions against youth gangs in the borough, we were asked questions month after month after month by opposition councillors in regards to what we were doing, and at times it seemed that our answers were actually quite lightweight. In reality, there is certain information that we would rather not have in the public realm, But in terms of the very specific you're asking about the relocation, it is a problem coordinating between different agencies. I can assure you that in regards to us suddenly being able to announce a dozen youth injunctions, there's a reason we have a massively expanded youth offending service. There's a reason we have joint resources in place with Essex Police. Work is happening behind the scenes. If she would like a more comprehensive briefing, I'm more than happy to meet with her privately, but I'm not willing to go into certain specifics that would be counterproductive.
Thank you, Councillor Holden. We now move on to question 2. Councillor Apothecary, would you please read out your question as set out on page 123 of the agenda?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When will the police officers funded by Thurrock Council start walking the beat in Thurrock?
Councillor Holden.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, with dramatically more police officers on the beat now, we are seeing them far more frequently. With additional investment from the council paying for more dedicated police officers, we are seeing them on the beat more regularly. Again, though, I would draw Councillor Apothecary to the previous answer that I have given. There is a reason that we have a reoffending rate in Thurrock amongst young people that's 10% lower than the national average. There is a reason that we have virtually crippled a youth gang in this borough. That is because there are certain issues that are tackled behind closed doors between partner agencies from the council to the police. There are certain issues that aren't always dealt with by the Bobby walking around the town centre. There are issues of gang-related activity. There are issues of domestic violence. These are the type of issues that, frankly, are dealt with in the shadows. So yes, we do have more bobbies on the beat than we did before. We are investing heavily between the Police and Crime Commissioner, this council and the government, but equally there is a huge amount of activity that you wouldn't necessarily see happen on the street. But if you look at some of the figures driving down some of those horrendous crimes like gang grooming, like domestic violence, that is where some of the core activity is taking place.
Thank you. Councillor Apothecary, do you wish to propose a supplementary?
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Holden. And again, I appreciate that you are standing in tonight, and this might not be your particular area. I was actually hoping you were going to just give me a really straightforward answer of next month. That was what I was looking for. There was a lot of fanfare, and I take your point about, you know, there are certain things that don't go into public domain, etc. But, you know, the council's funding of these officers was very much trumpeted. We had, you know, countless press releases with lots of those lovely photos of Councillor Gledhill in the high street, you know, surrounded by people in uniforms. You know, we had all of that. And this was something that residents felt was a very firm promise. And I'm going to be honest, I thought it was a firm promise. Yet they're not there yet. And I'd really love to know when they're going to be there. Please.
Councillor Holden.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I would just say to Councillor Apothecary, first of all, after 9.5 years as a councillor, 3.5 years in the Cabinet, I'm not entirely sure when I misled Councillor Apothecary by making her believe that I give straight answers. But if you want a very straight answer, let me give her one. We've got brand new town centre police teams in Grays, in Ockenden, in Stamford, and now, thanks to the investment from Thurrock Council, there will be brand new dedicated officers for Tilbury and Purfleet in January next year. 3,218 police officers in total in Essex by 2020. This council has put more officers on the streets than we committed to in our 2018 election, and now an additional 20,000 coming nationally thanks to the Prime Minister. Is that straight enough for you?
Councillor Apothecary, do you wish to pose a second supplementary question?
Again, slight opacity in that are those additional officers, because obviously we've got the town centre funding police teams which have come out from Essex Police, and I'm very, very specifically interested in the money that was committed from Thurrock Council. So I just would like some clarity around, are those officers arriving in January 2020, a year after they were announced? Are they actually the ones that are being paid for by the council? And secondly, how much say it would be really useful, I think, as local councillors, if we could understand how this scheme is going to work, For example, how much say do we have over where those officers go? Can they be drawn into Essex at any time? Do we get impact? How do we influence and shape where they go in our communities?
Councillor Holden.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, Councillor Pocker is quite right about one thing. Yes, it did take a little bit of time. Obviously, we wanted to invest more in policing. When we took over the council, we had a slight matter of the books that we had to deal with from your last administration. And of course, when you put new police officers on the street, it is a point of fact, you do have to train them. So yes, it does take a little bit of time to roll them out. But to be clear, the money that Thurrock Council is committing is over and above the previous commitment. They are new officers, they are additional officers. In terms of the operational nature that you're requesting, well, as I said, there is a degree to which we have partnership action. The £1 million that we put into working with the police to tackle youth gangs, that is a good example of some of the influence. And it's because of the financial strength of this administration, it is why we have the financial clout to wield some of that influence with the police. And she asked a very specific question about, can these officers be dragged into Essex? Well, the officers that I'm referring to, these are the officers that we are paying for. They are Thurrock officers, but there are certain instances that could see police officers drafted out of this borough. Though instances like that include when the police have to en masse descend on Westminster to protect the general public from an Extinction Rebellion protest, when they have to prevent Extinction Rebellion for committing crimes, vandalising public buildings. Those are the type of instances that can see police resources reallocated. So we are investing in the police force in Thurrock. We are putting more police on the streets, and I would welcome your support to making sure the police stay here and don't go to having to deal with the type of lunatic protests that we've seen recently.
Thank you. We now move on to members of the questions of the Cabinet. Question 1. Councillor Okanadi, please read out your question as set out on page 123 of the agenda.
Yeah. With the announced 25 million government investment in Tilbury, what are the real improvements that residents can expect to be delivered to make Tilbury become a more desirable place for people to live and work?
Councillor Cox.
Thank you for this great question. It's really important to actually talk about how this announcement come about. Obviously, it's a great announcement by the Conservative government. After us today, there's not enough lobbying for government money from the leader of the third party, like continuously mentioned, that we're not been funding. This is obviously funding, again, another £25 million after the lobbying from this council and the MP, local MP, to make sure we benefit and stand up to it for Tilbury. And Tilbury will benefit from this £25 million for town funding. But we must remember, this is on top of the injection of town money into Grays, which is up to £47.5 million we're going to spend up to in Grays on the town's funding and the High Street Fund. There was a lot of confusion about the two different funds because they got announced very close together over the summer. So this is a fantastic. We're at the early stages of developing what to do with these plans, and we're waiting prospectus from the government of what the scheme can include. But what I would say is we're looking to engage with as wide as possible in the Tilbury area, to engage with partners, residents, ward colleagues around the ward councillors and businesses around there to actually develop some great plans. So we've got this opportunity in the next couple of months to think about what we would like around to deliver with these town funding fund, especially not just Tilbury but in Grays as well, what we can do and how we can develop a fantastic up to £50 million that's allocated. If we come up with a good bid, we could get that money. We've got to come up with a good suggestions that are innovative and what we can do. I've got some ideas. I'd really like, Councillor Redstill's been many times mentioned how we deliver and how we can use the river. It's how do we get connectivity. There is a river there. We've got two bids between Tilbury and Grays. How we use that, how we deliver the bus network, how we can deliver river buses. I see the fantastic opportunities that I can see in London that you can get from Greenwich into Westminster very easy using the river bus. That is it. Obviously the river buses come here at night. They park up in Tilbury and then go off to London. Well, why are they going off? I know Gravesend are doing that, but we've got an opportunity there. But that's my suggestion of some of it. But what we do need to do is engage everyone here in this and how we want to do it. And it's really open. So the officers are here. I think there's a few meetings and trying to arrange the businesses to see what is available in Tilbury, what we can do with that. This is an opportunity, and I would say it's once in a lifetime. And what we don't want to do with this is what happened many years ago when I first got here, when I spoke to people in Tilbury. Well, what happened to that millions of pounds come in the 90s, early 90s, late 90s, and it just disappeared on it. We didn't know where it went. Well, I'm sure I haven't looked. I'm sure it was spent, and it's just residents not seeing it. But this is a large sum of money, and we do need to actually do it. But we don't want. I don't want to give out. This is what we're going to spend the money on. What I want to do is, what does Tilbury want, and then how we move forward with that, and that's what we want. And what does Grays need, and what does Grays want? So it doesn't look top down. It's got to be done like the local plan process. Is actually how we engage is really critical to that, to make sure that people, actually a wider community, see the benefit of nearly £50 million of town funding that Thurrock has got.
Councillor Rockingham, do you have a wish to pose a supplementary question?
Yes. Thank you, Councillor Cotshaw. It is very good that you admit that you do not know what you're going to spend the money on. It is very good. I mean, it seems to me that there's got some confusion about the 25 million. I mean, the real reason for it, I can tell you, is that the original announcement in July of this year by the government, they say that 100 England towns, including Tilbury, were named in the 3.6 billion town fund money to get improved transport and broadband connectivity. I mean, isn't it misleading that we have stuff in the papers, that I can wave it, that Tilbury is gonna, you're gonna make life of individual people better in Tilbury, whereas the money is for transport and broadband connectivity. So I want to ask you, just first time, that isn't it misleading that you're saying this to the community?
No, it's actually 25 million. What this is, let's be brutally honest, the Towns Fund the Centre Fund was invented. It's a Brexit dividend, if you want to call that. Well, what happens is there is 100 towns across this country that have been left behind. And Tilbury was a left behind town for many, many years. This administration has been pumping on, so Tilbury needs some love. Now, Tilbury is one of the 100 towns that have been classed as left behind. That's across the country. And you look at the towns, and it's interesting where they are, and you look at them and they're they're left behind towns. Now, that's why the full prospectus, you haven't seen it. That's just the starting thing. That's not the full prospectus. We're still waiting for the full prospectus, as I said in my answer. So I think you're a bit presumptuous to think that what we can do. We need to think about what we can do and come up with innovative ways of using that money. And that's what I said. Innovative ways of using that money and wait for the full prospectus. I think you're a bit too quick. But you carry on waving the thing is, this Conservative administration is going to give some love to them. And what I really would say, once you're trying to make that, is my advice for anyone in Tilbury, at any upcoming election in the next few months, we make sure, don't put this £25 million at risk. Vote Conservative.
Councillor Rockingham, do you have a second supplementary?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I do. I mean, it is, I was brought up not to tell lies, and I do not approach people wrongly. So it is a false hope you're giving to Tilbury residents, and you don't make a fool of them. There's a lot of issues in Tilbury. I mean, we're talking about the unresolved air pollution there, and you're talking about the transport, making transport better. You expect people to, yes, sorry, I'm not supposed to be making so much statement. I just want to ask you, is it possible for you to use money earmarked for something else to better people's life in Tilbury? Like do other things like create jobs for them, or do whatever Tilbury people want. And how do you think that is the topmost priorities of Tilbury people is to bring in more traffic into the town?
Look,
Councillor Coxon, can you make your response
succinct?
as brief as possible?
I realise it's 9:30. So I'm so sorry we're going to that. I didn't expect so many supplementaries. But it is an innovative way of using this money. We have got, you wait for the prospectus and then see what happens. Well, what I can say is, again, if you don't want that £25 million, that is madness. Like, if the ward councillor is not welcoming this £25 million, it's crazy. I can't believe it. It's phenomenal. I will walk with the other councillors that are not in the Labour Party to welcome.
Councillors, councillors.
So I just think, I'm always flabbergasted. A party that opposes schools, a party that opposes infrastructure, a party now opposes the money. It's just, it's flabbergasting. But I can't answer it. You've got wait until the prospectus comes out, and if you don't want to turn up at the meetings, that's fine.
Right. It's now 9:30, and it's the close of the meeting. Any report items outstanding are deemed formally moved and seconded and shall be put to the vote without debate. Members with motions still to be heard can either speak on the motion for no more than 3 minutes before the motion will be put to the vote without debate, or they may withdraw the motion and resubmit for the next available meeting. So, question 5, Councillor Worrell, would you like a written response?
Yes, please.
Thank you. And Councillor Collins, question 6, would you like a written response?
I'd like to resubmit, please.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. Councillor Fish.
I'd like to resubmit my question, please. Question 3, question 4.
Thank you. Councillor Mace.
Can I resubmit, please?
Okay, members, just for clarity on the motion, which is item 19, which is the next issue on the agenda. Councillor Gerrish will get 3 minutes to speak on the item, followed by no. Right, and then it will go to Councillor Howden to speak on the First Amendment. At the end of that, there will be a vote, and according to which one falls through, we will then go on to debate, or not debate, but to hear the third or the Second Amendment, and at the end of that 3 minutes, we will then take a vote between whoever won the first vote and the last amendment. I'm sure it will get clearer as we proceed. So, Councillor Gerrish, would you please present the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your clarity. I am proud to be presenting this motion to ask that Thurrock puts the fight against climate change front and centre to our ambitions for the future. We've brought this motion because we recognise the huge threat that climate change represents. This is particularly true in Thurrock, where we already have some of the most polluted air in Europe and many of the illnesses associated with it. We are threatened with the new Lower Thames crossing, a brand new motorway further polluting our air, not to mention the potential environmental impacts of 32,000 additional houses in our borough. We must have an answer to these issues. Thurrock is on the front line against climate change. If our skies become more polluted, Thurrock will feel it first and worst. If flooding becomes more likely, areas like Tilbury, who are already on a floodplain, will be most at risk. It's therefore the perfect time to make a statement that an alternative must be possible and set a new direction. The motion tonight is pretty simple. It recognises that we do face a climate emergency in Thurrock and requests a number of minimum actions that we expect those running the authority to take. I hope that we do go above and beyond even what is presented here tonight. We cannot, Mr Mayor, wait for others to act on climate change. We must help ourselves and take the lead. While the Council has made some improvements over the last 10 years, and I would in no way denigrate any of the work that's already been done in this area, it is now time to put this issue front and centre and make sure that it is factored into every activity we undertake. I hope that across the Council there is the will and the leadership to tackle this crisis cross-party and as one. Indeed, I believe we must act above mere party loyalties and present a united front, committed to a solution on what is the most important issue of our time. To that end, Mr Mayor, I am happy to take some of the amendments that have been tabled by other councillors this evening. If we move to Councillor Spielman's submitted amendments, I'm happy to accept, on behalf of Councillor Spielman and the Thurrock Independent Group, amendments 1.1, 1.2 and 1.3. I'm also happy to take amendment 1.4 with the proviso that we swap 12 months to 6 months and to append at the end, to take care of some of the concerns of that group, that the membership of that group should be agreed in consultation with all group leaders. Mr Mayor, of course, climate change goes well beyond just this council, and that's why I believe we must take a lead in making the whole borough follow our example. In order to be successful, we must take all of Thurrock with us on this journey. We must engage with our residents, young and old, from every part of the borough, along with our local businesses, unions and the voluntary sector, on how we move forward to meet this challenge. We know that Thurrock is home to people with real creativity, hard work and business savvy. It's now time to harness those resources to unleash a new wave of environmental entrepreneurialism across Thurrock that will face up to the problems that we have created and lead the way in overcoming them. Mr Mayor, the science is no longer in any real doubt. The special report on global warming published by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in October 2018 describes the enormous harm that a 2 degrees Celsius average rise in global temperatures is likely to cause compared with a 1.5 degrees rise. It confirms that limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees may still be possible with ambitious action from national and subnational authorities, civil society and the private sector. But Mr Mayor, we have to act fast and by 2030, not 2050. And I believe that we have a duty to play our part in this to the fullest. Whether or not we play a part in climate change, I believe, is no longer a question, Mr Mayor, it's an absolute imperative. So let's declare together today that we recognise the problems that face our borough. Let's commit to fighting with them and let's get on with it. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Mr Mayor, on a point of order, just before I begin my speech and my amendment, I think from what I heard, Councillor Gerrish is proposing to amend his own motion, but he's already moved the motion, so I'm not of the belief that he can amend the motion now that he's already moved it. If officers can clarify that. Certainly if Councillor Gerrish wants to come up with more a collegiate approach between the three groups, if he indeed cannot amend his motion now that he's already moved it, may I suggest that we simply don't vote tonight, the three of us take it away and bring something forward that can command support across the chamber, and perhaps we could then send that approach to Westminster to demonstrate how it should be best done.
Mr Mayor, on a point of order, if I can just clarify the advice that I received this evening. The advice was very clear that in moving the motion, I could accept those elements of the amendments which could be incorporated into that motion. Mr Mayor, I don't believe I finished moving that motion until the end of my speech.
But I understand you can, in your moving your motion, you can accept either my amendment or Councillor Spillman's amendment because they are properly tabled amendments. What you're suggesting is that you kind of splice parts of Councillor Spillman's.
Can I suggest that the discussions between both of you cease for the moment, because we need to take legal advice on what actually we can do and what we can't do. Although I do like the suggestion that perhaps the three groups get together and come together with a combined statement.
Could I just have a point of order? I slightly agree with James. If we're just going to push this through tonight, there's not going to be a debate at all, is there? Surely it'd be better to come to November's full council, so at least we can debate it.
Councillor, could I just take
Sorry.
what legal advice on?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In consultation with the monitoring officer and the Democratic Services Manager, the advice is that Councillor Gerrish is amending his own motion. He's not accepting either of the other amendments to the motion, and that's totally in keeping with the constitutional room to be able to do so. So he has amended his own motion whilst putting it forward. I do believe that if Councillor Gerrish wishes to withdraw the motion at this stage to take forward in terms of what Councillor Howden has said, then that would also be acceptable.
Councillor Gerrish, what do you wish to do?
So Councillor Howden speaks for 3 minutes.
Right. Councillor Gerrish wishes to proceed, so Councillor Howden, could you speak on the subject for 3 minutes, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, the amendments that I've set out are quite straightforward. Now, I welcome the spirit of what Councillor Gerrish is trying to achieve. The threat of man-made climate change is a very serious issue to the climate and to ecology. And I think by the fact that we have a Labour motion and we have an independent motion and a Conservative amendment shows there is broad consensus across the chamber that we do want to do something in a concrete fashion. My amendments, working through at 1.1, I think it's right that we add ecology to the issue that he's outlined. 1.2, the reason we have to aim, in my belief, for the 2050 target and not 2030 is because where the government have announced that it is their goal for carbon neutrality by 2050, that is the framework of legislative and resource change that will come with that. So we need to ensure that we do not take ourselves so far out of step we could forego some of the powers and resources that would be devolved to us by trying to achieve something outside the existing framework. My amendment at 1.4, I don't believe in creating these citizens' assembly things that Venezuela come up with. This is the citizens' assembly. This is the elected chamber. So it is right that elected councillors take responsibility and do this work themselves and don't outsource it. I thought Labour were kind of against outsourcing. Elected members should deal with this work. I've accepted suggestions from Councillor Spillman that this work should be time limited. This working group should have to get its work done by 6 months, and it should produce something that gets incorporated into the corporate KPIs to make sure people can hold us to account of what it is we are trying to achieve. Councillor Gerrish mentioned consultation with unions. Well, the GMB union said the implications for a 2030 target would be swinging, and they said that at the Labour conference. So I'm not quite sure you've got unanimity with your union friends. And at 1.7, my amendment to condemn the actions of the Extinction Rebellion movement. Let's be quite clear: they've wasted police time, they've broken the law, they've vandalised public buildings, they have encouraged, and Councillor Gerrish should listen to this as a former campaign for education, they've encouraged children to skip school. Councillor, this is extreme behaviour. It should have nothing to do with the council. We can set up a working group. We can have clear KPIs written. They can be incorporated into the scorecard. We can make our tangible contribution to man-made climate change. But a vague call to arms to assemble a bureaucratic extra body, sit on top of the council to act outside the legislative framework and try to achieve 2030. If we can't hit it, what would you sacrifice to hit that target? Get rid of affordable homes? As a suggestion? Because we know to make affordable homes affordable, we can't always be put to the same standard. So consider carefully the consequences of your vote. And that will be my amendment.
Thank you, Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, I ask for a requisition vote my amendment as well.
Right, we'll now vote on the amendment though. So all those in favour of the amendment, please raise your hand. And that's, sorry. Oh no, No, sorry, it's a requisition vote, so
Thank you, members. When I call your name, if you could just indicate whether you're for, against or abstain for the amendment proposed by Councillor Howden. Councillor Abbas. Councillor Akinbowen. Councillor Allen. Councillor Anderson. Councillor Baker. Councillor Chukwu. Councillor Churchman. Councillor Collins. Councillor Cockshaw. Councillor Duffin. Councillor Fish. Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Gerrish. Councillor Howden. Councillor Holloway. Councillor Hewlin. Councillor Jeffries. Councillor Kelly. Councillor Cathy Kent. Councillor John Kent. Councillor Kerrin. Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Lydiard. Councillor Little. Councillor Maney. Councillor Massey. Councillor Mays. Councillor Maldowney. Councillor Okanade. Councillor Piccolo.
for.
Councillor Pothecary. Councillor Potter. Councillor Ralph. Councillor Redsell. Councillor Rice is absent. Councillor Rigby. Councillor Salmons. Councillor Shinnick. Councillor Smith. Councillor Spillman. Councillor Van Day. Councillor Watkins. And Councillor Worrell.
Right, the amendment failed, so we now vote on the motion. Councillor Spillman.
Can I just clarify that this is now the amended motion as we spoke about before, yeah?
So, yeah. So, all those in favour of the motion? Okay, thank you. All those against?
So that passed. Now that motion, now Councillor Spillman is second for his amendment board if he still wishes to use it.
Okay, thank you. Right. Councillor Spillman, do you still wish to put your second amendment through? I understand that, but I did need to ask. That being the case, sorry? Yeah, the meeting is now closed. There is still some